Good evening. Welcome everybody to City Council tonight. We sure are happy to have you all here today. We're going to go ahead and call to order, please, if I may. Have a roll call.
Councilmember Dennehy.
Here.
Councilmember Schmischer.
Here.
Councilmember B. Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Stein.
Here.
Councilmember Tracy.
Here.
Councilmember Worthington.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Here.
Mayor Smith.
Here. Thank you. I would now like to invite Carrie Barrett from the Latino Coalition to give her invocation and ask everyone to please rise. Following, we will have the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us join together for this evening's invocation. God, Lord of all creation, lover of life and of everything, please help us to love in our very small way what you love infinitely and everywhere. We thank you that we can offer just this one prayer and that will be more than enough, because in reality everything and everyone is connected and nothing stands alone. To pray for one part is to really pray for the whole, and so we do. Help us each day to stand for love, for healing, for the good, for the diverse unity of the body of Christ in all creation, because we know this is what you desire. As Jesus prayed, that all may be one. We offer our prayer together with all the holy names of God. We offer our prayer together with Christ, our Lord. Amen, amen, alleluia.
Amen. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We reserve the beginning of City Council if there's anyone who'd like to address the council members about anything that is not on the agenda. Now is the time that you are welcome to do so. Seeing none, we'll move on to council member announcements. Yes.
Madam Mayor, we do not have a meeting this Wednesday. This is the Colorado Municipal League annual convention up in Breckenridge, where they discuss and provide training for city council people such as ourselves, and so that meeting is canceled.
Thank you. Ryan, can you please go over our consent agenda?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Item 7A is to approve the minutes for the regular city council meeting on June 6th, the general government meeting on June 8th, and the special meetings on May 26th, which was the selection of the District 2 council seat and the Trail Committee interviews, and then June 2nd, the homeless discussion regarding Ordinance 9. 7B authorizes the mayor to sign a water service contract for 1718 Pinion Avenue. 7C is the monthly budget summary for April, and 7D is to receive and file a list of bills.
Any questions for Ryan? All right, seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda and the agenda. Councilmember Smith.
Madam Mayor and Council, I move to approve the consent agenda as written.
I second.
There's been a motion and a second. Any discussion? Call a vote.
Councilmember Dennehy.
Aye.
Schmischer.
Aye.
B. Smith.
Aye.
Stein.
Aye.
Tracy.
Aye.
Worthington.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Aye.
Thank you, council, and thank you, staff. Ryan, do we have administrator's report?
We do. We have a very packed agenda, though, so I'm not going to go through too much. The one thing I do want to highlight is the very last item under Parks Department. The Canoe Nationals were bumped out of Buena Vista at the last minute for unforeseen circumstances, and we will be hosting those July 8th through the 10th. So that's part of the reason all the investments have gone into the river was to try and attract these types of events, and It's nice to see the fruits of that labor coming true.
Yeah, no, that is super exciting. Thank you for that. Any further questions for Ryan? Kathy, did you have one? Okay. Oh, I'll move it closer. My voice is so quiet, it's super obnoxious for these meetings. I will now move on to a public hearing. I will open the public hearing, and this is for item 9A, introduction and first reading by title only of Ordinance 13, Series of 2022, an ordinance of the City of Canyon City rezoning certain real property within the City of Canyon City, Colorado. And I would like to now invite, or at least turn the time over to Patrick Mulready, our city planner.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. This evening, we are here to consider a request by the owner of a parcel located in the 2900 block of South Street to rezone the property from MH1 Mobile Home Park to R2 Medium Density Residential. The site should be familiar to City Council members, as it was the subject of a public hearing this past February for a sketch preliminary plan subdivision proposal. Subject property is 24.09 acres located at the southeast corner of South Street and what will be the extension of North Reynolds Avenue north of its current terminus at Juniper Street. The property is currently undeveloped and unimproved, with utilities beyond the service mains located around the property in existing rights-of-way. The site has an active terrain with more than a 46-foot grade differential between the low spot on the property, where the property borders the lots on Robbie Lane, to a high point near the intersection of South Street and Rockefeller Avenue. Property is currently zoned MH1 Mobile Home Park Zone District, which allows the placement of mobile homes as a permitted by right use. It is this aspect of the zoning the applicant seeks to change. The Keystone Ridge property is currently zoned MH1 Mobile Home Park. MH1 and MH2 Mobile Home Subdivision are the only two zone districts in Canyon City that allow mobile homes as uses by right. When the public hearings for the Keystone Ridge preliminary plan were taking place, the applicant specifically indicated that he would be coming back before Planning Commission and City Council to request a zone change. In addition to the applicant's desire to rezone the property, it must be recalled that during the public hearing on the sketch of preliminary plans for Keystone Ridge, members of the community who got up and spoke also asked for a limitation on the number of new mobile homes that could be located in this area. The applicant seeks to rezone the Keystone Ridge property to R2 Medium Density Residential, another category of residential zoning within the city's Unified Development Code. Under the existing zoning, as well as the anticipated R2 rezoning, all lots within the subdivision would exceed a minimum lot size of at least 6,000 square feet and a 60-foot lot frontage along dedicated public streets. At the time of the hearings for the sketch preliminary plan, the lots were sized to meet minimum lot area for lots within the MHP zone. That would be 6,000 square feet. The minimum lot size in R2 is 5,000 square feet. So all lots within Keystone Ridge, which are averaging approximately twice that, or about 10,000 square feet, will still exceed the minimum should the zoning be changed to R2. Criteria associated with evaluating a rezoning request are found in section 17.10.040D of the Unified Development Code. By code, at least one of these criteria must be met in order to consider the rezoning request. Staff's analysis, which is contained within your staff agenda packets, finds that three of the criteria have been satisfied. One, that the rezoning request is consistent with the recommendations of the comprehensive plan. Two, that the rezoning is consistent with the purpose statements of the proposed zone district. And three, that there was an error in establishing the current zoning. Staff's analysis, beginning on page 4 of the staff report, finds that these three criteria have been satisfied, and thus the city can consider this rezoning request. And it should be noted that this zone change request is not modifying the zoning from residential to some non-residential zone. Both MH1 and the existing zoning and R2, the proposed zoning, are residential zone districts in character. Their principal difference is that R2 does not allow mobile homes, which is the applicant's request. Based upon these factors, staff is recommending that the rezoning request be approved. To summarize, as of today, staff has received no mail or email or correspondence of any kind concerning this request from neighbors. An analysis of the proposed rezoning and its impact, along with the neighborhood reaction during the public hearing on the sketch preliminary plan, and a review of the criteria for considering rezonings, leaves staff with the opinion that this rezoning request is valid and can be considered. Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on this request in May. Based upon that hearing, staff and the Planning Commission recommend that the request for the Keystone Ridge property to be rezoned from MH1 Mobile Home Park to R2 Medium Density Residential be approved. That would conclude the staff presentation. As always, I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have. Present to speak on behalf of this project is the applicant, Matt Koch.
And Matt, would you like to address council about this project?
Good evening. We have submitted the first 2 phases of this. We are ready to proceed with construction once the zone change is done. Other than that, there haven't been any changes. We are going to an R2 zone district to allow for some areas to have some duplexes. Some of the lots are suitable for those, so that's why we are going to the R2 zone. So,
Any questions from council for staff or for Matt, the applicant? All right, so.
Yes, I do have a question.
Absolutely.
Matt, as I understand it, there's an irrigation ditch that goes adjacent to the property, is that correct?
correct. The south line follows the ditch all along the way, and that is the main ditch. So it is within an easement, and it is maintained by the ditch company.
So it is within an easement?
Yes.
And so the ditch does sit on property owned by your clients, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so they are, you and they are aware of the ditch's presence and will take whatever actions required to maintain the ditch company's rights along that right-of-way.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, we're just really, I mean, like every community, we are in a major housing crisis. The good news for Canyon City is that there's an impending development happening, and there's, a few more on the way. And so we're really excited that this will meet the needs, especially for some more affordable housing with the better zoning.
Yeah.
So thank you for being a part of that solution. With that said, is there anyone from the public that wishes to address the council? Manny Collin.
I'm sorry, Mayor, I did not fill out a sheet for this. I wasn't aware of it, but the ditch itself, I think that's Fruitland. My question is, obviously with all your development, you do have stormwater issues to deal with, and all I want to do is mention that about the stormwater. All this goes into the Abbey stormwater drainage area, and that's the one you're working on roads. And so that increases the amount of stormwater there as well as through the Abbey. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
So Matt, maybe you can address that, because from what I understand, for a new development, they have to maintain and keep any stormwater in their property. So it cannot go and spread to the Abbey and down onto Rose. So Matt,
Now,
if you could address
Is that a time release on that?
So they detain and it releases at historic flow rates.
Okay, and you had a hydrologist determine those historic flow rates?
There was a drainage engineering study submitted with the sketch and preliminary plan. The two green areas you see on their plan are
Right.
the detention ponds that will be built.
Okay, thank you.
Matt, would you like to add further enlightenment on that issue? Matt's right behind you. He would.
So as Patrick said, we did have an engineer evaluate the whole site and our development. The stormwater drainage will enter into detention facilities and will be released in a timely manner and not directly into the ditches. They'll be drained into the existing stormwater management systems in the area.
So when you say managed, it'll be managed within that site plan.
Right, the detention will be, and then released into the storm drainage system that's in Reynolds Avenue and then over in the other Rockefeller Avenue. So,
Okay. Were you able to hear that, Manny? Is that satisfactory?
I think so,
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, sure, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'd just like to point out one thing, that previously, city codes did not require developers to address stormwater during the planning stage. The requirements for stormwater came in after the planning stage, and that is one of the things that we changed in our code. And that's actually, I think, both pre-Ryan and pre-Patrick, I believe. But that is one of the changes we made and said, wait a minute, stormwater needs to be addressed way up front and not later after things are somewhat set in stone. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other comments from the public on this hearing? Then I will close this public hearing and entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve ordinance number 13, series of 2022.
Second.
There has been a motion and a second. Any discussion? I'll call a vote.
Councilmember Dennehy?
Aye.
Schmisher?
Aye.
B. Smith?
Aye.
Stein?
Aye.
Tracy?
Aye.
Worthington?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick?
Aye.
Thank you, council. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Matt. We sure appreciate you and Keystone Ridge coming into town. We're now moving on to item 10A, and this is city charter amendments. Ryan.
Yeah, this is a follow-up to the charter discussion that we had on June 11th regarding the city charter. And this memo has these based off of priority-based and then suggested changes. The first section is probably the most critical to look at regarding changes to the charter because those current provisions are not consistent with Colorado law. And happy to open this up for discussion. Corey, our city attorney, Mr. Hoffman, I don't know if you have any other comments on that.
Nope, happy to respond to any questions.
So I believe City Council wanted a little bit more time to review the suggested changes to the charter. We also want an opportunity to see what we would like to bring before maybe a focus group so we can get citizen feedback before we approve anything to go onto the ballot for this fall. And so this is an opportunity for council to maybe give their opinions. And council, I don't know do you want to go through each article and say, yeah, let's move ahead, or this is a no-brainer, just put it on the ballot?
Well, and I think one thing that we really got to watch is because, we don't want to flood the ballot with a lot of things to share. And, we take the priority and leave it at that for right now. So.
Okay, well, there's some that definitely have to go according to the law, some things that I would be curious to see what the citizens would have to say, and that could be a great improvement to our charter. Definitely don't want to have it to be overwhelming, but yeah.
Just one other comment. I would want each one that we think should potentially be considered for the ballot to go to that focus group to make sure that we're getting that input and having that dialogue in advance. But I think it makes a lot of sense to go kind of one by one and see where we are on them.
Okay. So we'll start with the first one, Article 3, Section 5. And this is open meetings law. I think this one's probably a no-brainer, just clarifying that at all times, meetings with city council members will be open and stated for the public. Are we a thumbs up for that one going to the committee? Okay. Section 5, or Article 5, Section 5. This is another one where we're currently inconsistent with state and federal laws because it says that employees serve at the pleasure of the city council. However, they don't serve at the pleasure of city council. It needs some clarification on that they are hired through the city administrator and staff. The city administrator, the attorneys, and our judge serve at the pleasure of council. But other than that, it comes to our city administrator's oversight. Should that go to the focus group? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay. 15, Section 3. This is about a low fine that's inconsistent with state law. It is interesting that they have a fine maximum in the charter, because that's something that doesn't change unless it's by the vote of the people. And if that was done 50-plus years ago, it's quickly out of date. I personally would be interested in what the solution would be.
Well, and I would clarify that this is a very limited constraint, because it's a constraint for a violation of the charter. So the language is any person who violates any of the provisions of this charter. And so the code provisions that are adopted are not subject to this limitation. But if anyone were to violate the charter, this limitation exists. And this limitation is far less than the limitation under Colorado law for what would otherwise be a misdemeanor.
I personally would like to see some language in there. I mean, and we'll have more conversations, but there's still some sort of like cap, like not to exceed the state's fines or something.
Well, and that's why we indicated as authorized by law for municipal courts of record. So
Okay,
that is,
that's how it's,
yes, that is
still has a limitation.
That is the portion of the state law that has the limitation on fine and imprisonment for municipal courts. And
Okay. All right, should that go to the committee? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I had a slight request for a wording change, but in general, I'm thumbs up.
Okay. Maybe get that to,
Catherine provided it this afternoon.
okay.
And I've provided alternate wording.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Corey. Corey provided it this afternoon.
Okay, so if that could be taken care of at that focus group as well. Here's some other language, and it talks about the branches of government. It talks that how there in the charter that there's an executive branch, but there is no executive branch. We do have checks and balances with the legislative, judicial, and administrative, but not the executive. Thumbs up?
I don't think it changes much. I don't think it really changes anything. I don't even know
If it needs to go to a focus group?
I really don't.
If they're gonna go review it, let them review them all and understand it. We're letting them see everything, and it'll be, likely a no-brainer for them as well.
Well, then should we just?
The next.
So we have
yeah,
thumbs up on that one?
I
Is
think
that
so, yeah.
Thumbs up on that one?
I don't think we need to, but for the focus group, I don't want to overload the focus group in that either.
So you want that to be an automatic? Or just not even address
I
it?
just say not even address it.
Personally, I don't think it benefits us in any way, and I think it kind of clutters up the number of things that we're asking citizens to devote time to think about, and I don't think that it improves our city charter really in any way. I think it actually, in some ways, helps people understand what the role of city council and the city administrator are, because people are, the legislative, judicial, and executive branches of government is kind of how our government is structured. So for me, I think it's just, I don't know that there's a benefit to striking those words, but I don't really see a harm in striking them either. I just don't think it rises to the level of need.
Okay, Corey, do you have anything to add?
Well, and I think what Ryan attempted to do in this memo was have those that are number one as ones that were the possibility for this election. Certainly council can talk about more, but those were the ones that were clearly inconsistent with law that we were suggesting if there was some level of urgency to get those approved. The ones that are under numbers 2 and 3 could probably be a more long-term discussion. We can certainly add them to tonight's discussion and talk about whether to go to the focus group. But certainly the way this was divided up was intended to be an opportunity for a more, efficient discussion about those that could be on in November that were true cleanup. And those were those first 3 that we just went through.
So I guess the question for council may be, were there any items in 2 or 3 that you also feel should go to election this year?
Madam Mayor, I'm not sure you're seeing my hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thanks for speaking up.
You've missed me a couple times, but maybe we can get back to some of the earlier things. I would just say I think it's worthwhile for council to just go ahead and and discuss briefly everything that's in the memo and kind of give an idea of whether we think things should just be put aside or maybe they're important enough for discussion in a focus group. So I'd like to see us go ahead and talk about the rest of the memo.
All right, well, we'll stay on the big screen so we can see your thumbs up or thumbs down. So as far as the branches of government, is that I need to see a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whether we even need to address this? Okay, so that's one we don't need to worry about. The Director of Finance shall publish in a manner determined by City Council by ordinance a list of the warrants issued for the previous month, stating the name of the person, firm, or corporation to whom issued, amount thereof, and showing separately the warrants payable out of each fund. That was the next one as far as publications. Is that worth? I think, was that, Corey, can you give us some more explanation?
Certainly. So currently, the charter requires that all warrants be published in a newspaper of general circulation. We suggested two alternatives. One is to delete it altogether because it's not a requirement for a municipality, a home rule municipality. In the alternative, if the city wanted to assure that warrants were continued to be published in some manner, the second alternative was, instead of deleting it altogether, to have warrants published in a manner determined by ordinance by City Council. So City Council would always require that warrants be published, but you could determine the mechanism over time best designed to reach the people.
Councilmember Schmischer?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think this at a more macro level is something that I would love to see a focus group discuss. Like, how do they best receive information from us? How can we best be transparent with them? What are the best means and methods of communication? Right now, I feel like we should be communicating in every single platform possible. We should be communicating in the newspaper. We should be communicating via Facebook. We should be communicating via word of mouth. We should be doing everything that we possibly can, because I don't think that we are being incredibly successful in being transparent. So I would want to see this discussed at a higher level, but I also am concerned about the idea that we would be taking away guarantees of transparency in our charter and deferring it to a future council to decide via ordinance how people may or may not get information. So while I would love to see a focus group discuss at a macro level what's the best way for us to get the word out to people, I also want to make sure that we aren't watering down our charter when it comes to protecting people's rights to having information in a publicly accessible forum.
So you'd want it to be in a manner that it would still be in the charter, but maybe have more flexibility in how, I mean, charter, requiring the publications in multiple venues?
No, I want the charter to require, I want the charter to require publication in multiple venues. I think that the focus groups could help us better understand how and what venues are the most appropriate for our constituency.
Yeah, the only thing is that how often do we go to a vote? Whatever we put in it for this year will be out of, the way technology is going to be out of date really fast. So I can see the need for maybe some flexibility, thinking for the future ways of communication that they can be.
And just for clarification, Article 7, Section 12 is only one item. It is only the list of warrants, so it's only the bills. That's it. So there's a whole, and I heard the discussion loud and clear about, for example, the publication of ordinances. And so you'll see that there is a much different suggested revision. But I would encourage council, it is on every level figuring out the best way to communicate. But frankly, when this charter was drafted, there was no internet. and no one could have imagined in their wildest dreams all the different means to reach the people. And my hunch is in 20 or 30 years, there'll be ways we don't think of today that to reach the public. So that's why the alternative flexibility is provided, that you have to publish, but you get to determine how in a manner best designed to reach the people.
Yeah, but we don't want the future council to be like, well, we'll determine that to be very limited. So I can see where you'd want it to have some sort of language in there that it would have to be very broad. Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick?
You might check with Councilmember Tracy. Her hand may be up again.
Well, I just have a quick comment on this particular item, that I think that the suggested alternative is worth considering. The one after the word "or" in the memo, the Director of Finance shall publish in a manner determined by City Council by ordinance, and so on. I mean, that makes sense to me, that you're not taking it completely out of the charter when you do that, but still allowing for flexibility needed as things change over time.
Thank you.
And I did have a
Sure.
question myself. Ryan, could you give us examples of warrants, what those are comprised of?
So actually, in your packet, it's the, anything that would be sent out by check.
So any bill paid by check?
That is correct.
Interesting. Councilmember Stein?
I just want to echo what some of the other council members have spoken about, that we have no idea how people will communicate 50 years from now. We all may have a chip in our head or something, who knows? But I think at the macro level, having a focus group talk about the best way to communicate with our constituents, I think that's great, but I don't think it should be part of the charter. Whatever we put in the charter should be something that can change over time with what's available for communication. But I think it would be great to have some sort of focus group that talks about how best to communicate with the community, and maybe have an assortment of age groups, because, you know, elderly people they're just not online as much as younger people, and they're not on social media in the same way younger people are too. So, and the kinds of things that people use to communicate with on social media changes a lot constantly. So that, I think that is something, a good topic for a focus group, but I don't think we want to make it part of the charter discussion. I think the charter, we should keep it as vanilla as possible, so that we're not
it's not vanilla
tied
as
down.
possible right now.
But I mean, but that
Yeah.
part, just that part about communications, keep it as open as possible for council to decide how they're going to do it, but with input from the community.
So we would need to put this to focus group
Yeah.
to be able to expand.
That's a
that.
thumbs up for me.
And the next one is Article 12 on ordinances. There's a number of policy questions raised by the current language. At a minimum, the provisions of Section 2 contain a process that, and then it's blanked out on my list. Well, this is about the introduction of ordinances by council people. That needs to be changed because it says councilmen. But ordinances are also not referred to a committee of 3 councilmen. And so there's just becoming more consistent in how ordinances are put on to the agenda. Is that correct, Corey?
It is. It takes out sort of what I would call the extraneous stuff, but keeps the entire process that council was concerned about in terms of publication in place.
Would you like that to go to a focus group? Sure.
I actually really enjoyed reading this again, because I think that we may want to take another look at what our charter actually says we should be doing and consider doing it. You know, right now, if we had had a committee of interested council people take a look at the UTV ordinance that came back before us on Monday, 2 weeks ago Monday, we wouldn't have had to make all of those changes, like sitting up here on the dais. We would have had a thoughtful discussion amongst interested council people and brought back a second version that already had all of those changes incorporated that we could all then sit and consider. So I actually think we should go back and take a look at what the charter says and think about whether or not we should be following what is currently there, instead of just saying, let's change it to meet the process that we currently have. So I am not particularly interested in pursuing this change. I think we should take a look at what the charter says we should be doing and think about doing it.
And from council's direction, we bring those ordinances to the committee meetings. That's and, you know, previously those committee meetings of general government and vision were half of council. Actually, all of council sits in both of those committees now. So that, I think that's where we're, you know, we are following what the charter says. It's just, I don't know
Well,
if
it
that's
used to be half the council sat at a table
right.
and discussed, which was difficult because before to be televised, so we could be on Facebook Live and Channel 191, we needed to be up here with microphones and the TVs so that it could be transparent to everybody, which made it a little bit more of a formal process.
And I greatly appreciate the fact that we do spend time in General Government and Vision Committee thinking about ordinances before they even go to first reading, and I think that that's a fantastic process. I'm speaking specifically about the process between the first reading and the second reading. Because I think what we've seen repeatedly is that after the first reading, we get a lot of input and we get a lot of ideas because that's when it's published and that's when people have heard about it and that's when, you know, we all really start chewing on it and thinking about it. And then what I've seen happen repeatedly at second reading is that we have a lot of changes that need to be made. And rather than making those while we're actually doing the second reading, I think what the charter currently outlines is that a committee of 3 of us should be thinking about it after the first reading and reviewing it and making those changes and bringing it back for second reading. So I think we're getting a little off on a tangent, but I just wanted to explain why I don't think that this is a good idea and why I don't think that we should necessarily just change the charter to reflect current process. Thanks.
Councilmember Stein?
You know, if that is an option, but when you have 3 council members, that has to be an open meeting. So would we have to add extra meetings every month that were published and publicized and open to the public? Because if 3 council members are discussing it, it's an open meeting.
I think having robust conversations with the entire city council, I think we need to be more robust in our general government meetings before it even comes to council. If we anticipate something that could be a little bit more controversial or more in-depth, that we take it to we assign those committees so we can have it more in-depth. So even the first reading itself is more, I think I would like to see that the first reading is created to be better so that we don't have to go through the in-between phases. And so if that's, something that we could tweak, but.
So maybe this is a great example of one that should be a much longer conversation and dialogue about what we think the future of it should be, not necessarily ready for a focus group or for certainly the ballot in November, but something that we should chew on and figure out what's the best way to get the community input and to ensure that we're doing the best job that we possibly can.
So let's move on to section 1, legislative powers, ordinances, titles, and acting clauses.
Emily may have her hand up again.
Emily.
Actually, I have a question about section 2, whenever we get to that.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about the section 1? Corey?
Section 1 is unchanged.
Okay, so we're good with that?
Yeah, so you'll see that what I've tried to do is create a strike-through of the entire portion of the charter related to the adoption of ordinances.
So section 2 of ordinances, and this is about ordinances shall be introduced by title at a council meeting. It might be easier if you just explain each one than me summarizing it really quickly, Corey.
Again, what I tried to do was currently, as opposed to being referred to a committee of 3 council members, it's referred to a committee of the whole. That's essentially what the general government and the vision committee meetings are. What I tried to do is take the current process and incorporate it as it is being used into the charter. And so the city can still have study sessions, whether it's general government, which is the equivalent of it being the committee of 3 as the city is doing it today and has been for several years, but took out what I would call the extraneous language, but maintained the publication language that council felt so strongly about in terms of publishing in a newspaper at various points in time. But this entire process really is trying to make the city's ordinance provision consistent with what it's doing now, and it's not inconsistent with what the current charter reads, but it is making it more streamlined in terms of the language. So there are no other changes in this that change the mechanism the city uses today in terms of how it adopts ordinances. It's just a streamlined language that reflects that.
So, thank you. And on this section 2 on ordinances, I believe this one is talking again about ways of publication, so that after the adoption of a first reading, where it talks about it, it's in the newspaper. And again, might be part of that bigger conversation of adding that to that conversation of how to publicize that. So I think we could
But based
include
on council's direction at the previous general government meeting, that's not changed in here at all. So
Okay.
that is still newspaper of general circulation, because there was pretty strong pushback that it should be in a newspaper. And I guess in 50 years, if newspapers aren't there,
Well,
council will have a discussion.
I know there's a strong opinion to keep it in newspapers, but I think maybe some additional language that broaden those publications beyond that. So it is contemporary, at least. Are we okay with adding that to the similar conversation they're already having about how people would like to be publicized, hear their publications? How about the emergency? The existence of an emergency shall be final and conclusive.
Madam Mayor, I have a question before that.
Oh, sure. Yes, Emily.
And then also I have a question about that emergency section 2.
Okay.
In that paragraph under section 2 ordinances, right after the strikeout section where the sentence begins, it shall then, and then there's a short strikeout, and then it says passed or rejected. It just looks like the word "be" might be missing from there. And then my question in regard to, I just wasn't clear on the wording in all caps about emergency ordinance, whether that means an ordinance that's passed on only one reading or not. It just wasn't clear to me what the intent was there.
And that is correct. So the city
Okay.
currently has in its charter sort of loose language on what an emergency clause is. And so this frankly tightens up the emergency ordinance provision to make it consistent with Colorado law, identifies the types of ordinances that can be done as an emergency. And yes, if they are done as an emergency, it's one reading. And they are intended to be the exception, not the rule. And again, I would encourage council, as you're looking at this section of the charter, to look at all of the sections collectively, because there is so much extraneous language. It's hard to go through and say, section 2 is this and section 3 is this without looking at them together. So for example, there is currently language in what is now section 5 that addresses emergency and appropriation measures. And so rather than having it there separately, so that you can look at how an ordinance is passed and what types of ordinances are done as emergencies, we've tried to incorporate it into one section so that you're looking at it in one integrated framework. Likewise, if you look, for example, at section 4, that's not necessary because an ordinance can be amended at any time. And so there's a whole host of things in here that is intended to, again, not change the way the city is doing things, but to more clearly reflect the way the city is doing things.
And if I may, I'll just add a real brief comment about the way we're doing things. My recollection back, several decades ago when I previously served, I think we didn't have committees of the whole. We had more city council committees that really spent time digesting some of these things, whether it was a proposed ordinance or something else having to do with policy. You know, general government, there was a water committee, and I don't remember what else there was. So it might be just, I mean, either thinking about that concept again and or making sure we allow enough time every month for the general government committee, the committee of a whole that we currently have, allowing enough time for that group to really do the work that's needed to be done in that setting rather than at the city council meeting.
Yeah, I can see that too, especially when we have URAs and we're in a 1 hour constraint. I feel sometimes like we definitely don't give justice to some of the things that do need to be digested more. So this looks like something that needs to have a lot more conversation. We're not ready to go to a vote by any means. So we're getting pretty far into here. Do you want to keep going one by one? Okay.
I think we've covered section 2 ordinances though. Like as Corey mentioned, I think we need to think about all of these together because they all are pieces of a whole. So I think from my perspective, it would then go to section 3.
You do have Article 7, Section 3 as the last item under number 2, and I would encourage you to look at that one as well.
Thank you, yes.
Article 7, Section 3.
And this relates to purchasing policies. The recommendation is to take purchasing policies out of the charter because it's the kind of thing that changes over time, probably most significantly than any other item in terms of whether it be the amounts you delegate as spending authority, and frankly, policies about competitive bidding, using some historic examples, having things like local preference is more difficult, frankly, when you have competitive bidding provisions in your charter. And so the recommendation is to simply change the entire provision on purchasing policies to say the city council shall promulgate purchasing policies by ordinance. It allows council to be flexible as time goes on in terms of how it does purchasing, the manner of bidding, if it wants to do things like local preferences or anything else related to bidding processes, to really be able to be flexible in an ordinance.
So I think we can have more discussion because I can see how we need to be able to be flexible, especially with changing times, the way things are doing it. But I also feel like charters need to have a lot of restriction in it to avoid any possibility for corruption. And just a blanket, purchasing policy by ordinance. I don't feel comfortable with that. Like, there needs to be a lot more teeth to that for accountability.
That is the difference between a framework charter, which gives the city the authority to do what is allowed by home rule, and a constraining charter, which limits the ability of the city to do things without a vote of the people. And it's really the difference between a direct democracy and a representative democracy. And if the goal is to have a direct democracy, you should absolutely have everything in your charter.
Councilmember Schmischer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to echo what you had said. I think that there are certain provisions in here that are protections against corruption and have nothing to, sorry, Corey, but I disagree. I don't think that they have anything to do with representational democracy versus direct democracy. You shouldn't have unauthorized commitments. You shouldn't have somebody able to incur funding on behalf of the city without there actually being a proper requisition made, which is the very first.
And that's by ordinance. I mean, that's the whole difference.
But I think that things like that are fundamental and wouldn't change over time and therefore should be in the charter as a protection against corruption. I also think having an amount by which it has to come to council is a protection given the nature of the government that we have, the form of government that we have, and having everything that's over 6,500 have to be up for public discourse and discussion and viewing, I think is important for transparency's sake.
Well, that's where it gets a little bit tricky though, because if you have inflation that doubles every 10, 20 years, or 1 year, then you can be having discussions by council for very minimal purchases of things, which can be really put a wrench into the efficiency of government. So More discussion on this one on a macro level. Administrative powers.
And Mayor and Council, I'll be the first to admit this is a long-term discussion, but I've talked to you all in various orientations that council's power comes by acting as a body. And council's power in acting as a body does not include the administrative components of the city, the day-to-day operations of the city, which it has vested in a city administrator. And so many of the changes identified under number 3 are in that context, and frankly, it is a protection to city council as a body, and frankly, to the city council as individual members, to try to create that division between the administrative authority vested in your city administrator and your governmental and legislative authority, which is as a body. And so those, I think those changes may be much more long-term discussions, but it is definitely something I certainly feel strongly about in terms of defending you all as a body and as individual members of that body to keep you all in a better place for purposes of liability protections.
Okay. So we'll add it to our long-term discussions. Is that okay, Council? In terms of office, oh yes, Emily, please. Thank you for
I
speaking
have
up.
just a kind of a simple question, I think. Wondering if there's anything more to the difference between using the term city administrator versus city manager. Are there any kind of behind-the-scenes implications of staying with what we have, city administrator, or moving to the more common label of city manager? It seems like that's more common now, but I wanted to be sure there wasn't something behind that.
It's a good question, and I'll give you a Colorado perspective and a national perspective. The Colorado perspective is that smaller towns have administrators, and so if you look at the statute related to statutory towns, it refers to town administrator. Bigger cities typically have city managers. That's sort of the Colorado perspective. The national perspective is that oftentimes administrators are the position with a strong mayor form of government, and the administrator is often, frankly, more like a secretary to the mayor. Now, that is certainly not the case in Canyon City, but when you're talking about nomenclature, that is the nomenclature that's used, especially on the East Coast, that is the difference between an administrator and a manager.
Thanks. That's helpful. Thank you.
So going on to section 2 for terms of office. And this is the terms of the city administrator. The attorney shall be indefinite, and both such officers shall serve at the pleasure of the city council. The term of the municipal judge shall commence in January of each odd-numbered year, and the appointed municipal judge shall serve a 2-year term.
And this is simply, frankly, so that your employees are yours and can be changed at your will, and that's the purpose of this suggested change. Right now, to remove an officer, you have to have cause, and frankly, in my representation of you, I want you to have the maximum flexibility so that you always have people you trust in the positions that are your 3 employees. And so this is intended to create that flexibility.
Additionally, the intent is to change it from a new council having to decide whether the 3 employees have been, acting appropriately.
Correct, with the idea that a new council may not know.
Right.
And so it gives them, at any point, the opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
Councilmember Schmischer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. While I appreciate the idea of kind of removing for cause and serving at the pleasure of, and maybe thinking about the time frame at which we do an annual review and an annual reappointment, I do think it's important that we actually do that. And I understand that it may not be wise or prudent to do it just after a new council is sworn in, and that the timing we should maybe think about. But I don't like the idea necessarily of these 3 positions, or sorry, the 2 positions, because the judge would still serve a 2-year term, but these 2 positions would just be indefinite, and we would not do annual reappointments. I think it's important that we have a review process and that we take the time to think through, is this a good fit? Is this working well? Do we want to appoint for another year?
And so, Councilperson Smisher, do you mean annual reviews or biannual reviews?
So for the judge, I understand that it's a 2-year term. For the city administrator and city attorney, I understand right now it is biannual after following each general municipal election. So I think at a minimum, it should be every 2 years, and I understand the idea of doing it on the off year as opposed to the on year so that everybody's had a year in. Frankly, for the administrator and the attorney, I think every year is probably appropriate. But again, it's probably a longer term discussion.
Yeah, I agree. And even though the philosophy is that it gives us that more flexibility to do all those things, but when you just read it in black and white, it sounds the opposite. And so that's where I think maybe some more wording and clarification may need to be in there. Going to Article 7, Section 5, this is again, the limitations of the cemetery fund and the park improvement fund would typically not be in the home rule charter and may be worthy of discussion. I think I'm okay having that discussion. How about you guys? Not ready for an election yet, but maybe a discussion. The next one is for public parks. An issue that has arisen in the past is the requirement to hold an election to acquire a park, playground, golf course, swimming pool, recreational place, or area. By the way, that includes an open space. This is an opportune time to discuss if such a requirement is necessary. This subject has actually come up a lot in the past several years, and I think I would really like to see the focus group take a hold of this, get some information, because there are some potential properties that the city could acquire, but we would have to have an election to do so at this time.
Well, and let me give an example, because I think the reason this charter provision was originally suggested was because if you receive a park, it's potentially a maintenance obligation of the city, and so it was a desire not to have unfettered obligations of the city. As the city develops, this would prohibit the city, for example, from getting a park as a condition of a dedication of a residential subdivision. Even if the city could delegate the maintenance of that park to another entity, even with that delegation, that acquisition by dedication would still be prohibited. So I do think this is worthy of a discussion to the extent the city wants to increase its ability to have amenities for its citizens, yet has a charter provision that prohibits it.
It's a really big obstacle. Councilmember Smith.
I just had
And
a
then
question
Emily.
about that one pertaining to our situation with Rudd Park. Are we in violation with that, or are we still within the charter bounds?
I'm not sure what the issue is specifically.
Well, Rudd Park technically becomes city property during school hours, correct?
So we're not owning it. So
Right.
that's why it's
Okay.
not a.
So it's multiple agency agreements?
Right, we retain ownership, so we already own it, so
Okay.
it's the reverse of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councilmember Tracy.
Yeah, I was just going to add to the issue about public parks. That's really a long-term issue, and it's been an obstacle a number of times over the years. And I think as part of having a discussion, a broader discussion with the public about this one, that maybe we should take a look. I don't have a clue whether we have the right acreage of parks for the size city we have, the size population we have, or whether we don't. My sense is that at least in parts of town, we may be behind, particularly when you think of the concept of neighborhood parks. We've done pretty well with the larger parks over the years, but there are areas of town that are not served by smaller neighborhood parks. So I really think we need a good, robust discussion on this one. And as part of that, figure out, how do we match up to other communities of different sizes in terms of percentage of ground that's dedicated to parks and open space.
Thank you. So take that to committee. Thumbs up on that. The next one was about the having provisions for airports and landing fields. And I think our last discussion was, why not just leave it? You never know what's going to happen. Council members, what are your feelings? Just leave it?
Madam Mayor, that's just my opinion is just leave it. That's kind of still where I am on that one.
Thank you. The next one, the last one, is issues regarding the term of the mayor and whether to authorize a veto could also be considered. I'm okay leaving it as it is. I think a mayor is not paid enough or has enough authority to make a 4-year commitment for all that they go through. And for where I am on my second term, I'm like, man, if I had to go for another 4-year term, no freaking way. So 2 years at a time, maybe. Yeah. Who needs a right to veto? So it's up to the council and what you want to do with that.
Yeah. And Madam Mayor, I would just say, my opinion is leave it as is for all kinds of reasons. I mean, it's one of those things that maybe there isn't anything driving a need for change. And so you try to imagine worst case scenario and, you know, maybe with the wrong person in that position, we wouldn't want to change the provisions
It might be
we
nice to have
have
some
now.
opportunities for change, and I think it's fine the way it is. And I'm okay without having a veto. I think that just the way the mayor position is set up, I think we're good as is. So, do you have all the direction you need? Ryan, we would like to have a focus group put together for some of these measures to get citizen feedback before going to an election. I always like to be able to hear from a robust group of all demographics and business, regular citizens, all different types and sizes and backgrounds to really be able to put their say in so we can make sure that we have their feedback before we take anything to an election.
And what I have are those first 3 provisions under Section 1 as something to take to the 2022 election. What we will do is we'll set up a couple of different nights or times for focus groups, and we'll start that process before we bring some language back to City Council.
Thank you. Councilmember Schmischer.
Could I just clarify, not to take to the 2022 election, but to take to a focus group as we determine whether or not to go to the 2022 election?
Right, so the discussion would be whether or not to take it to a 2022 election, yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Which ones we would and how it would need to look to.
And then I think parks as well. That one also we had mentioned wanting to take that to the focus group.
Yeah, the parks and open spaces.
So what I have is the 3 under number 1 as priorities that should be considered for 2022. I've got several that were listed as for focus group. Was that part of the same discussion for the?
So, and
Go ahead.
I may be incorrect. What I had written down was that the first 3 and the Article 14 public parks would go to the focus group for discussion. And then there are several that are a longer term discussion amongst council before going to a focus group. And then there were several that are, we don't want to consider this.
Okay, so that.
Yes, I agree.
Council
The ones
wants
we
parks.
said more robust conversations, those are for us before we.
So parks to go,
Parks would go to the
Okay.
focus group. Yeah.
perfect.
And may I ask, that will be determined before July, I think, 28th is when we have to let them know if we're going to be into the election this year?
We can let them know that we're considering,
I'm
items.
pretty sure by that time I have to tell them yes or no. Just, it's upstairs, but I'm pretty sure it's the 28th. I may be wrong on that date, though. It's that Thursday right around there.
in July.
It is not a binding intent to participate until the city actually signs the IGA with the county.
Okay.
Yep.
That means yes for now.
All right, are we ready to move on then? We are now on item 10B, second reading and adoption by title only of Ordinance 9, Series of 2022. This is an ordinance of the City of Canyon City amending Title 17 of the Canyon City Municipal Code by the addition thereto of a new subsection 1 of Section 17.05.150 concerning temporary shelters. Ryan, I would like to invite you to give a discussion to staff, but also include in that discussion, if you're willing, the alternative ordinance for consideration.
So as City Council knows, there's been a lot of discussion, public input regarding Ordinance 9. In your, we have a corrected version of Ordinance 9. After the last second reading, there were some additional changes that were made. So the printout that you have has those additional changes incorporated. You do have multiple versions of this ordinance in your packets. So you have one version with the changes from second reading, and then you also have a version of the ordinance that removes the safe outdoor space language and only has the indoor temporary shelter language.
And part of that too was just based on lots of feedback we've gotten from the public, but also in consideration of all of the requirements that the public would like to see on a potential safe outdoor space. It came to a level that was not viable for any organization to be able to make that actually happen. And so there's really no point in pursuing that. Let's maintain order in this. This is an official city council proceedings. But with that said, Corey, there still are liabilities, and I would appreciate maybe a little bit of a conversation about that.
Well, I mean, the city may end up making new law. I mean, it's just going to frankly be dependent on if the city's enforcement of its regulation of things like camping is challenged, and the fact that there may or may not be adequate shelter space. It's, as we talked about at a previous meeting, Boulder is being sued now on, frankly, an ordinance that's more permissive than the one that the city's considering now. But, you know, the city is forced to act or not act because of a problem that, frankly, multiple branches of government should be addressing. And so it'll be an open question if we get sued based on enforcement. We'll have to see how that plays out. But the city has insurance, and it would likely, depending on the nature of the lawsuit, be covered by insurance.
And I would also like to add, too, that since those conversations they have got Built for Zero team, which has been aggressively working as hard as it can to address homelessness and resolve homelessness. They've already reached functional zero for veterans homelessness. They're just, over 20, mid-20s-ish of solving chronic homelessness. And chronic homelessness are those who've been homeless for a year or longer. They're dedicated to that. And based on these discussions, have reached out, and they're creating a much more robust and bringing a lot more organizations and leaders and resources to the Built for Zero team to really still tackle homelessness in Fremont County. And so I definitely want to put that message out there that we are still seeking to solve homelessness, because it is a huge issue in our community, like it is in every single other community across America. We are not unique, and we're going to take care of it in the most efficient and cost-effective way that we can, that is agreeable to our community. In addition to that, I just also want to give a reminder that based on these conversations, we also have made some changes. We have and are in the process of having some agreements with the Sheriff's Department, where a quarter mile of that those weird lines of what's city and what's county, that there's going to be agreement between the sheriff's office and the CCPD that both can go to calls, and so that there can be some more calls and address people being able, or officers being able to address 911 calls or trespassing calls, whether you're a city or county on our boundaries. And also an agreement, because the city, for the river walk, we've heard many that feel unsafe being at our river walk. That's a really big concern. We do patrol cities' river walk, but we only have a very small portion of that river walk that's in our jurisdiction. And so having an agreement where our CCPD can patrol the entirety of the river walk on a more regular basis. And so we are continuing to find situations that help make a safer situation for all of our residents. Am I missing anything about other changes that we've made since then? I think those are the big ones.
Those are the big ones. The memo of understanding, or IGA, with the sheriff's office is in the sheriff's hands, and we're awaiting that response.
And we've had some positive conversations with them, and so I really, really appreciate that. And for those that have been willing to come to the table to have solutions for addressing homelessness. I know we had a really brave and courageous woman who was homeless that's now journeying home, who spoke about her journey out of homelessness, and many people spoke afterwards, I would help her, I would help a person like her. And we have a lot of people just like her that are in those situations that are in our town that just need a little bit of a hand up. And so we're doing both, the carrots and the sticks for enforcement as well. With that said, we do have a stack of people who have asked to address City Council. Based on the information that you received, if you still wish to speak to City Council, you're welcome to. If you don't, that's fine. We are limiting it to 3 minutes so that it's fair and equal to every single person here. Would ask to please not have any calling out or applause, so that everyone can have the equal opportunity to speak in a safe environment. Lisa?
I just have a quick question. The alternative suggestion that you have, could you explain it to all of us?
So, yes, so the SOS as is has a safe outdoor space for outdoors. There's a second part of it where a church could have an opportunity on a temporary basis to house homeless people overnight, probably during the winter months, on an as-needed basis with some rules and stipulations.
So, the rules and stipulations are what we want to know.
So they're all in the ordinance. Yeah, so if you go to canyonscity.org and go under government, and you go under agendas, and you click on it for tonight's agenda, it will be on there. Cindy, are you going to go make some physical copies? It's this one, the ordinance right there. So we'll make some physical copies for you on hand.
Thank you very much.
So the alternative is just to keep the church opportunity, and that's only if a church wished or wanted to have that temporary opportunity. They would still need to get a permit and show that they had a lot of provisions in there to meet standards. And that includes taking care of the neighbors' backgrounds. I'm trying to find here, do you want to go over that, Corey, or where, let's read it out loud for the...
I'm happy to do so, but I want to clarify, it's geared towards churches and nonprofits, but because they're typically the ones that would have the wherewithal to do something like this, but it is not limited to them. So it is any entity that could provide an overnight shelter.
Indoor.
Indoor, has to be indoor. And the minimum requirements are potable drinking water on site, waste receptacles and needle disposal containers on site, access to hand washing on site, access to shower facilities within 1,000 feet of the shelter, access to laundry services, access to medical services, clean bedding, and restroom facilities. So unless, other than the access to shower facilities, most of that is on site. And then in addition, plans for a whole host of things, all geared to make sure that there are no impacts on the neighbors.
So part of those host of things would be a plan for compliance with the provisions that must be provided under this section to occupants to the shelter, a plan for how the shelter will minimize impact on the surrounding businesses and residences, a description of how the shelter will serve the homeless population that will be accommodated by the use, a description of staffing for the shelter and the training provided to staff hired to fulfill the identified staffing demand, a description of the anticipated providers that will serve the population that will be accommodated by the shelter, a list of job retraining and education uses within 1/2 mile of the proposed shelter, a code of conduct that applies within the shelter to all occupants, and a description of consequences to be imposed for violating the code of conduct, a plan for managing exterior appearances of the shelter, including trash, litter, hazardous materials, biohazards within the identified perimeter area of the shelter, a description of the procedures used to manage intake of the homeless population that is proposed to be served, including registered sex offender background checks, a description of all medical-related services that will be provided at the shelter, and a description of all social services that will be provided at the shelter, including but not limited to housing or rental assistance, employment referrals, psychological counseling, job training, and other benefit navigation. Again, all of this, and as every single agenda that is on City Council is online, you can access online, always. Everything that's in our agenda is online. This is for indoor, opportunities for indoors that had to be permitted
And
to shelters.
temporary. And I
and
can't
it
emphasize
is
enough that it is still the temporary.
And temporary means,
6 months or less,
it's the same as the SOS.
except for that's indoors.
I understand that, but it's 6 months.
6 months or less,
I
but
thought
the
it was
ma-
only supposed to be during inclement weather, because it was
It
mentioned in
can.
the article that.
It can be. It depends on what the church applies for. So we did have a church a couple of years ago that they did have folks in their church overnight, but for them, the stipulation was if it gets below a certain temperature, then they will take 5 people into their church on those nights under those temperatures. And so really, there's a flexibility there for that.
But what we're voting on tonight does not have that stipulation.
Well, there's some flexibility there, depending on what the needs are in the community at a certain time. So whatever those needs are, I mean, if Loaves and Fishes, if they are able to accommodate, then they can accommodate. There won't be a need for a church to take that up if they chose to do so. And again, this is almost like a half of a protection to us on legal basis. We haven't had a church ask us to do this for a couple of years now. Although when we did, we definitely felt like there needed to be a permitting process, so we made sure that whenever they did, if they did again at some future point, that there were some rules and regulations to make sure that it was accommodated in an appropriate way, both for those who are being housed under inclement weather during the cold winter months, but also to those around them, the neighboring.
So just a point of clarification on what Ms. Foster Owens just passed out. What is actually, what the mayor has been speaking to is essentially starting at J. So it would be striking section 1 and,
I,
sorry,
yeah.
striking section I and starting at J, just so that it's clear.
I thought you had photographs for one and I didn't get one. We'll share.
Emily?
Thanks. Maybe this has already been said. I thought it might be helpful just to clarify again, the reason for an ordinance like this is just to make it clear that a certain use would be allowable in certain zoning districts in the city. It does not mean anything will happen. It depends on whether there's an entity out there in one of those zoning districts that's interested in doing this and meeting all the criteria, but it might be good just to cover that again.
That's correct. It authorizes the use on a temporary basis if someone applies.
It isn't a public hearing.
This is temporary, this is just
Yeah, okay.
All right. So, the city council, do you have anything you'd like to say before we move on to public comment? Hearing none, I will call them in the order that they were received. Everyone will receive an equal 3 minutes. Green light is a go, yellow light, 30 seconds left, red light, your time is up. Please again ask for code of conduct that we do not have any hollering or applause during this time. We would appreciate that. Yes.
I do have one thing before
Sure.
we get going all the way. As I'm reading this and as I've read this, the only thing that's still concerning, there's a couple things, but the one thing that really stands out to me is if we allow it, churches or other places, I want to make sure that we're not near our schools. And I think that's an important factor because we could have people coming out of these shelters and we know the condition of homeless and I feel for the homeless. I've helped the homeless, but I don't want to have homeless standing right next to my kid's school. And I think that is so important that we really got to protect our youth in this as well because I've had some encounters just within the last couple months with my son where I've had a homeless person start cussing in that, and it's been more than once, and one was not in Canyon City, but one was. And I had to address this homeless person and ask him, hey, this is my son here. And I feel that we need to restrict some stuff with our schools and protect our kids as well.
All right, so I am going to read these in the order. I do just want to say ahead of time that I recently have either bruised my tailbone or broken it. So if I stand up, it's kind of weird, but that's why. Yeah, it's just because this is going to be a long night and it's getting painful. But we're going to start with Ty Shepard. After that will be Manny Cullen.
Good evening. Thank you for your time. So my question might be towards the attorney, I guess. Is this ordinance still sort of just preventive to not get sued, so to speak?
That's a policy decision for the council. There is a comprehensive policy and ordinances the council has already adopted related to limitations on what the homeless can do. This certainly reinforces the ability of the city to enforce those.
Okay. So is that the council's take
Well, I
that
think
it would be?
It's also that if a church, like we said, a church has chosen to do that in the past.
Right.
Definitely felt like there needed to be a little bit more of a process there to make sure that the church was protected, the people in there were protected, and the neighborhood was protected around it. And so that's part of that.
So is it just churches? Is that stated in here? Or
It is
it's
not.
Correct?
So there, if I could, Madam Mayor?
Sure.
So there are two ordinances being considered
Right.
tonight that we have in front of us. One contains sections I and section J. That's one ordinance, I and J. And another ordinance that has section I only, which is the temporary shelter version. And so there are two ordinances that will be considered by council here. And
Right.
so it probably, if make sure that if you can, as the public is speaking at this, direct your comments to I or J, perhaps. I is I want to make sure I say it correctly.
That's a safe outdoor spaces, I. Emphasis on outdoor. J is an overnight shelter, which would be indoors.
Correct.
Doesn't delegate whether it was a church or not. It's an indoor facility.
So I is outdoors, J is indoors. That is being considered.
Okay, I just wondered because we said churches, and so then that,
Well,
so it's really
traditionally,
not,
yeah.
but it's really still open.
So what it says is a pre-application site inspection shall be required. The purpose of the inspection is to determine if the facility meets building, fire, and electric code standards for the proposed use. In existing structures, the inspection is intended to ensure that the permittee is aware of applicable building modifications that would be necessary to operate the building as an overnight shelter. The permittee proposing to operate the overnight shelter shall submit a safety and security plan developed with input from the police department to address security and safety concerns related to shelter operation, including a plan for managing disruptive behavior and unpermitted camping in the vicinity of the shelter. And then that's where it goes into all the listings of things that would need to be on there. Now, as far as the temporary part, we might, if we strike I, we might need to make sure, if we keep J, that it is.
It's in section 2, Madam Mayor.
Section 2, okay, so it has the temporary part in there. Okay, excellent.
Okay, well, my question was on the preventative part of, seems like we're trying to do this as a, prevent from being sued type of situation. I had other questions the last time of why would we do it and all that, but it comes back to, we're gonna prevent ourselves from being sued by, as a Boulder and whatnot, and to my knowledge, prevent defense doesn't win a whole lot of football games, and so it doesn't make sense to me to have this out there just to have it as a prevention.
Right. Well, I think the ultimate part, as I mentioned before, is to solve homelessness, and especially chronic homelessness. And so part of it, it is a tool to bring people, as it is stated in their provisions, of having resources where you're connected to resources, where you're connected to behavioral health and social health. All of those, like the temporary shelter was before, it got a number of people out of homelessness and back to living being productive citizens. And so again, this is a tool to solve homelessness, to get people off of the streets, out of the parks, off the Riverwalk, and back into living productive lives. And so it's just one more tool, one of many tools that we have to address homelessness.
A lot of tools, I agree with that. And so as we've been over this already, is why do we need this one more tool when it feels like we're just welcoming more in? And I think that's the concern of the community. It just feels like we're putting out more free stuff to allow them to come without any kind of, I mean, there's a few things they have to do, fine, but it's still a freebie. And those freebies are just gonna welcome them in more. We're gonna double in size and have more problems than what we already have. And so, that's all I have.
Thank you. Next is Manny Colon.
I guess the best thing I can do is make this real brief. I think the previous speaker said what we feel, us as the community. I don't think we need to bring any more here. I think we have all the tools we need. We've looked at several things with changing some of the boundaries for our law enforcement. I heard the best comment last time where, why should we try to help 100 people and piss off 15,000? That's kind of the way I feel.
Gary Nines.
Yeah, I was just thinking with the council, I'm not sure who your constituency for this is, because I think anyone that was listening heard loud and clear that the community does not want this. And I wonder where your constituency is. And 2 churches can ruin this town as much as this city council can. So temporary is not 6 months. And you provide services, you're going to get more people taking those services. It's ridiculous that you're so tone deaf to what your community wants. Those are my remarks.
Fred.
Thanks again. I think some of it has been said in the last meeting. I was hoping you heard that last meeting and the citizens that talked about this. Doesn't look like you did. Is it in the city charter that we solve homelessness, that we cure homelessness? Is it in the city charter? Is that part of your job descriptions? I don't believe it is it? Okay.
So, well, I'll tell you, okay, please. We could do absolutely nothing about homelessness, and I would say that 6 years ago, very little was done about homelessness, and we were absolutely overrun. We had people complaining almost daily about the impacts of homelessness. We'd have city council meetings here tonight, and homelessness would be all over Veterans Park, with needles in the parks, people in the bathrooms staying over there so the public couldn't use it. It was a huge problem. So for us to be able to stop having those terrible behaviors that affect the opportunities for the entire public to be able to enjoy this community, something has to be done. And so that's where the tools are, where we're trying to implement tools.
So you're going to invite more in?
Well, I'll say that homelessness has been reduced by almost about 50% since 2019. We have not invited more homeless people in. We've actually reduced it by 50% by implementing these tools.
Where are the numbers coming from?
Originally they did, once a year they did a count, but starting in 2019, they started doing a count real-time numbers. So every time we had an active group, it was actually a church organization, among others, that they're homeless outreach. And so they go out wherever we hear that there's a homeless encampment or where there's hot spots, they go out and they meet those homeless people, they take count of them, they find out their names, their phone numbers, their information, get them connected to services. And part of that way of solving that homelessness and reducing it by 50% and keeping track of those numbers is that they sit down twice a month with a number of resources, behavioral health, Slow Vista Health, housing navigation with UCOG, the police department, and they go name by name, each person, so-and-so, this is their problem, he's a veteran, he needs this, this, and that, he has aversions for this, what would be a good fit for him to be able to move on to a better, more productive life. They tailor fit a solution for that particular person, and that has been what has helped solve homelessness the most, is basing it off of a person-by-person basis. And so they feel very confident that they know the names and contact information of almost every single person they can, and they record those. There's also some questions about how long they have been there. They took the information of all those names, they went to DHS and checked them when they started receiving welfare from DHS, and how long and what year that they started to do that. And so they have checked and double-checked that information. It has actually been way more robust over the past 2 years than it ever has been before. I'm going to turn the time over now to Luke Miller.
Hello, everybody. So I guess the thing that I keep hearing the most is, if you build it, they will come. And that's kind of what the best we can do. Well, they're already here, okay? So I think we have to decide as a city, do we want to offer exit strategies for people? There are going to be people that are never going to take them. We know that. We're not going to end homelessness. It's just not going to happen. But do we want to offer opportunities for the people who want to improve themselves? And that's the big question here, to me. To me, what's being suggested, if I understand it correctly, is that we're talking about churches having the right to legally take people in for up to 6 months. Is that correct? Churches, entities, what? Nonprofits.
Yeah,
okay,
it's pretty open.
Okay, so a nonprofit, an entity, having the legal ability
to take people in on a selective basis and try to help them get out of this pattern. Is that correct?
That's the intent.
Okay, and we're against that for some reason. Well, you know, we're not going to save money by pretending the problem doesn't exist, okay? If we pretend stormwater management doesn't exist, that's not a problem. Well, we're not going to spend money to drain the stormwater. What's going to create more problems later? Let's get ahead of this. Let's help the people that we can get out of this. Let's help them be able to bathe so they can go to a job interview, so they can have clean clothes, so they can get a good night's sleep. I mean, I guess this question is for the city attorney. Where is a person without a home legally allowed to exist in this community?
It's a good question. It's a good question.
So we don't know. We don't
I don't
know.
have an answer for you.
Okay, so if I was unfortunate enough not to have shelter, a basic human need, I am now a criminal. Is that what we're saying as a community? No, right. That's not who we are. Okay, let's get ahead of this. There's been a lot of suggestions offered for actual solutions, but for some reason, we can't get behind any of them. We're going to just say, oh, the problem's just going to go away. Let's just ignore it. It's just going to go away. Well, it's not going to go away. It's here. If you build it, they will come. They're already here. Let's help them get out of it, the ones that want to.
Okay, he has a right to speak just as much as everybody else about murmuring in the audience. Dawn Burnett, you're next.
Thank you for listening. I just want to bring a couple of things that I have. I am a registered nurse. I work at Parkview. I used to work here in the emergency room. Part of the reason that I left was the stress of dealing with a lot of these people, because they come in, they get everything free, and they are a drain. They talk terrible to the doctors. They talk terrible to the nurses. They swing at us. They spit at us. They have no respect for the people that do try to help them. I do work at Parkview now, and I also worked in the emergency room, and they used to have a large population of homeless, and it has just gone through the roof. And it's because they've tried to help them, and they've, given them this and given them that. They are such a drain on the facilities and on the medical people. That's why we all can't afford medical. We don't get the best care because we can't afford it. Our insurances have gone up because of it. But yet these people that you want to help, they take, and now I call them and they say, oh, and this has been like a year, 2 years ago. I called him after they discharged. He was living in Canyon City, and he told me all about how the police there, the hospital there, helped them to get here because they didn't have a facility that was willing to take them. We can't discharge them back on the street, even though that's where they live. So Canyon City accepted them. They came here, they got in our facility, and I said, so now are you going to go back to Pueblo? He said, oh, no. He says, no, and I have buddies in Pueblo. And, yeah, I talked to him. So guess where they're coming from? They're coming from the hospitals, from everywhere. We talked, and people talked about how they came from the sheriff's department and how they brought them down here. Well, they're coming from the hospitals, too. They are a drain on society. I am so about helping the young lady, the two ladies that spoke about being homeless. Whatever money, I don't understand where you're getting your money, where it's coming from, why you want to do this for all these people when they are a drain on society. Take that same money and let's help the ones that we can help, the ones that want to be helped. The people that you want to put in tent cities or in these facilities, these churches, they don't want help. They want to stay out on the street where they can get their drugs and get their money
Okay.
from people.
Thank you. You have your time limit. Councilmember Dennehy has a question for you.
And I'm going to ask this question probably of everybody, and I wish I would have started this. You know, because I said a little bit there what I feel, and especially with our school system and that. But as everybody comes up here and says, we don't want this, we don't want this. This is part of America. It's not part of Canyon City. This is America, and I think we all know that. But if anybody has just a solution, a little idea, something to give the council, the city, everybody to think about. We all have a right to criticize, but it's really better to criticize with an idea. I'm just saying, guys, we're open. I would like to hear some ideas. Anybody got any ideas? We have right, we brought some.
I'll take one more minute since I didn't.
Excuse, I'm sorry,
No.
your
But
time is done.
But that's all I wanted to say.
Fill out another card, please. Fill out another card, please,
You'll
sir.
need to fill out another card and get back in line. As far as the money that we spend on homelessness, we actually spend very little money on homelessness. We aren't the county. The county is, they are the Department of Human Services. We don't have that. We don't have welfare. We do have some money that comes when you, if you have a citation like a speeding ticket that you have to pay a fine, you can choose to give that to charity. That comes into a big pool, and once a year we'll assign some of that money to charities. That usually goes to food banks. We have matched some grants for like housing navigators, but other than that, the money that we spend most on homelessness would be probably extra police patrols, having the extra time to take to lock our bathrooms at night and opening them back up in the morning. If there's homeless encampments at our parks, the extra time and staff it takes to clean out those encampments. They're big, they're messy, they're toxic. It's costly to clean those up. So most of our money is spent on cleaning up after the side effects of homelessness. We actually don't spend very much money at all on homelessness itself.
So then what do you want to keep promoting them to come? Giving them.
As I've said, we have reduced homelessness by 50% over the past 2 years.
I don't believe that.
William Colon. William Colon.
Well, when I turned in my little slip of paper, I thought I was going to be coming up here to thank you, but that's not the case. I've been to every one of these meetings. I've watched more people than are sitting here tonight come up here and tell you directly to your face, no, we don't want this. With the exception of Luke Miller, the only person in the last several weeks who's come up here and said, he didn't really even say he was for it, but he said there should be an answer out there. Everybody said no to this. Even the brave homeless person who came up here said, she didn't come out and say she was for it. She, as a matter of fact, said she probably wouldn't go to a facility like that. She preferred to live in her car. I believe that's what she said.
Yes, she did.
Now, it just blows me away that I stare you guys in the face and you guys keep beating your head against this wall, because this wall's not going away. My understanding is this is the second reading. So you guys have, is that true? This is the second reading?
Hmm?
So you guys have changed the wording in this. I think this should be the first reading.
Well, it would be an amended reading,
Okay,
deleting
well,
the safe outdoor space.
to
I
me
will
it's-
say though,
to me
Will
it's the-
Collin, just, and you can, stop his time, so I'm not taking up any of your time.
Thank you.
When we had the last workshop, there's a question specifically asked to that entire audience. Obviously, a safe outdoor space is a huge contention. The second part of this ordinance has to do with temporary indoor shelters. Do you have a problem or an issue with indoor shelters? And there was a pause, and there was not an outcry of upset about it. And so we thought, well, this seems to be a lot less controversial, so maybe this would be a good compromise.
I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I did say that if we did do that, you're opening up Pandora's box.
So can you please fill out a form and address City Council? William Cullen, we'll put your time back on.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So as I'm saying, I don't think it's right that, I mean, this is an amended copy, but this should be the first reading, not the second. We the citizens of Canyon City should have an opportunity to digest this. Indoor, outdoor, I understand your point. Just because there was no answer doesn't mean that we're not thinking of an answer, accepting that answer. So I don't think it's right that this be considered the first, or this should be the first reading, not the second reading. I think you guys are, I don't think this is true, but it feels like you guys are trying to push this through. And I know a lot of people out there do feel like you're trying to push this through, and I don't think it's healthy for our community. I'm sure that if we, lots of these people wanted to sit down and actually have a productive work session, and actually I think you could pick a few of the people out of this crowd, and not everybody, because I think that it just there'd be too many of us, but I think you could pick a few people out and we could all sit down and come up with something. There was a lot of great ideas that came out of that last meeting. I don't really know if they were discussed. I don't know, maybe you guys discussed them, I'm not sure. But I think that there is something more that can come of this. And already some good stuff has come about this, when you talked about the line between county and city and whatnot. So there's some good things that could come of this, but just pushing to get this through doesn't sit well with the people sitting on this side of the railing. And I think you all should know that. And I think you guys do deep down inside know that we're not happy about this. And I don't think these people are pretty determined. I don't think they're going to stop. So we need to come to a better understanding of this. So I would hope that you would not go forward with this for now. Let's talk about it some more, but you guys made changes, and we'd like to discuss that. We'd like to digest it more. Thank you for your time.
Councilmember Schmischer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. City Attorney Hoffman, could you please correct me? My understanding is that we literally did not have a choice. We had to have a second reading of this ordinance this evening. This was not an option that council had. This is what is required of us.
By the state charter. Or the city
If
charter.
council wants to consider it, you can kill the whole thing and start over. And I want to make it abundantly clear that if council wants to kill the whole thing, it can, you just have to start over.
Sorry,
But
to be clear,
if you want to consider the ordinance as drafted or as amended, it had to occur tonight.
So to be clear, my question is not, can we vote it up or down? My question was, this had to appear on our agenda this evening. We had to say we are having a second reading of this ordinance on our agenda this evening, because that is when we tabled this too. This was not a choice that we had. This is what is required of us, or at least that was my understanding of what was required of us.
It had to be considered tonight. It doesn't have to be approved tonight.
Absolutely. I'm not saying it has to be approved tonight. I'm just saying we had to have a second reading of this evening.
No, thank you for the clarification, because I'm not up on city council rules.
Yeah, and that is, we
laws.
had that big charter discussion. That's in the charter.
Okay.
We have to do this.
I understand. Well, then I would hope that you guys vote this down then. Thank you.
I will say that we have continued some other conversations from that workshop, some talk about the CDOT bridges being a place for homeless to camp out, and reaching out to CDOT to see if we can get some no trespassing signs there so we can enforce no trespassing under those CDOT bridges. There was some talk about some more pedestrian east side, west side Canyon City connections, having more conversations around that. Definitely open up to, absolutely more open to smaller discussions. That would be easier to have those conversations.
Just so you're aware, there are no trespassing signs under at least 4 Mile Bridge, which is
Okay.
and it has been for years. But any of the no trespassing signs that my family puts up, because we butt up to that property, most of them get torn down almost immediately, just as point. But yes, there's a great big one underneath 4 Mile, as I
So
remember
we
last
are
year.
speaking with our CCPDD about how we can patrol those better.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And just as a point of context, we haven't added anything. This second part of the ordinance about a possibility for indoor temporary shelters has been in here the entire time. But all of the consternation and public feedback has been predominantly and almost pretty much exclusively about outdoor spaces, including almost everything on here: tents, tents, tents. So I feel like if there has been a neglect of your we have been listening to the outdoor portion of it. Mike Short.
the last meeting was supposed to be a work session. That was a disaster. It was not a work session. What we're asking is to be heard. This council continues to push this down our throats, and we don't want it. Let us give you some good things to put in this. Let's have a good work session, as Lisa had mentioned. Break down in groups, have people divide up, and let us give you some better ideas. There's many holes in this ordinance as it's written. I don't care if it's the tent city part of that or if it's the inside shelter. When you say 6 months, that's year-round, because this organization can run it for 6 months, and this organization can run it for 6 months, and it's even more than that. Okay? So that can be bounced around, and it can be a year-round shelter. One of the things I'd like to say is, what do you do with the bad actors? Okay, we've been dealing with this for the past 10 years down in our area. You want to be able to move them out of a city park to a shelter. Then if they don't follow the rules, you're going to kick them back out in our backyards. Okay, and that's been happening. Councilman Danahay, you just said you don't want it near your school. For the same reason, we don't want it in our backyard. And you don't want it in your backyard. None of you want this in your backyard. We need to do better at this ordinance, and we shouldn't pass it as it stands. You know, we've had 3-minute snippets to get our concerns conveyed to you. These 3-minute snippets have been rebutted by unharnessed time by the mayor's puppets. And I'm very upset about that. Mayor Smith, stop pushing your agenda on us and the city council. Give us a chance to weigh in. Vote no or put it on a ballot. Thank you.
Tambra Stutz.
Hi, thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. Someone asked who your constituency is that supports this, and I will publicly identify myself as someone who does support this. This is not the answer to homelessness. It's not the only answer to homelessness. It is part of a much larger package that really needs to encompass many different sides. And safety at night for families that are homeless, that have children, is imperative in order for them to change their lives and become productive members of society. Furthermore, I heard a lot of talk about why is the city paying for drug addicts? I don't see anywhere in here where it mentions that funding is coming out of the city's coffers. Can someone clarify that for me?
There's no funding.
That's what I thought. Typically, these types of operations are managed through grants and ground level fundraising, and that's where it should be. It should not come from the city. I do agree with that. My tax dollars should not pay for that, and neither should yours. But to prevent philanthropic organizations from providing resources that are desperately needed in the middle of a pandemic and an economic downturn, I believe is unethical. And you have an opportunity to share your voice, and I have an opportunity to share mine, and I thank you for that.
Lisa Himes.
Good evening. Lisa Himes. I would like to thank all of you for your hard work. I know this is frustrating for you. I know that you are trying very hard to come up with solutions on what can be done, and I do applaud that. Obviously, we've all made our opinions abundantly clear on not wanting it in our backyard. But what I want to mention in particular is, I know, Ashley, you had mentioned that you want to come up with a solution because of the damage that is done in the bathrooms and everywhere else around town. With all due respect, the people that would stay in the SOS or even in the churches are not the people that are going to be tearing everything apart. We're talking two different people. We're talking apples and oranges. We all have said we want to support the people that are willing to be helped and want to move forward. We do realize there's a tremendous mental health issue. We realize there's a drug issue. But as far as the SOS, as far as the churches, The people that would be accepted into these organizations are not the people that we have a problem with. They're seriously not. And no matter what we do with an SOS or a church, it's not going to take care of our problem. And so that's why what I want to make sure that you understand. I am going to go against everybody. I'm going to wholeheartedly say I support the city considering allowing churches to open up during inclement weather, just for the brief time of the inclement weather, to allow people to come indoors and get out of the weather. I support that. I don't support 6 months. I don't support this being moved from place to place to place to place and it never going away. I believe that, first of all, we don't even know that the 38 beds at Loaves and Fishes, we don't know if it's going to be sufficient to take care of the people that are willing to live underneath those guidelines. It's totally different times because we're during that stage. And I just want to say that we're not heartless. We totally would like to help those that want to be helped and can be helped. And we'll work with you to come up with solutions. And also, I do have a hard time. I think the last meeting, we got blindsided. We were expecting a workshop. It turned into a presentation. We had a council member say we were unruly. In all due respect, I think it was a great meeting. I thank you.
Nikki Reynolds.
Good evening. And thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your experience. And it's not up to me to say that your experience isn't valid. However, if I may, I'll share my experience as a care manager at Sol Vista Health, supporting the indigent population. The individuals that I support are enrolled in services to improve their situation. So often, Loaves and Fishes shelter, the Kaya House, is filled up. What happens with clients that are showing up for their appointments in office and they don't even have a place to sleep? And there's not a place in the shelter for them to sleep. How are they supposed to stay connected to services and improve their situation? One of you made the comment, and I thank you for making the comment, solving homelessness is not part of our job description. However, I would argue solving homelessness is part of our human description. As humans, it's our responsibility to see the human in another being. Despite that human maybe not being cleaned up or thrown cuss words, well, guess what? Their basic needs of survival are not met. How would you hold yourself? How would you hold your demeanor if your basic needs were not met day in, day out? You didn't know where you were sleeping. You didn't know when your next meal was. You don't know what you don't know, and that's what I tell myself every single day, to unpack my bias and to show up for people and hold a safe space, to build trust, to build rapport, to encourage connection to treatment and other resources, because it takes a network of people surrounding just one individual to escape homelessness. And turning our backs against these people is certainly not the solution. It's going to be here regardless if we approve a temporary place, whether it's a church, a nonprofit, or another entity. It's still going to be here. Please stay human. Thank you.
Sean Maher.
Hello, I'm Sean. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. As many of you probably know, I'm the pastor of Livingstone Calvary Chapel here in Canyon City. We also oversee a 38-acre men's addiction recovery facility outside of Florence. and it's got a 30-room bunkhouse on it, a four-room residence where staff live on site. So I say that to let you know that I speak from experience. We've been running that for 10 years now. In regards to the church temporary shelter suggestion, part of this ordinance, first of all, 6 months is not short-term. From my point of view, it's transitional. So I would ask the council to vote that as a no for that time of period for somebody to operate under a short-term in shelter as far as a church or any other thing. I do agree with inclement weather. As we know, I'm part of the Ministerial Alliance. There are churches in our community that have stepped up in inclement weather, which kind of takes care of the problem of maybe us being sued is not having other places available. There are, but I will tell you that the regulations that are in this current ordinance, they're not viable. They're not viable for any organization, nonprofit or otherwise, to meet that. And I'm not saying that should be changed. I'm just saying the ordinance is crap. And it needs to be tossed out because it's not even a viable means to meet the needs for a nonprofit or somebody who operates in the way that we do to do that. And yeah, there are two groups of people. There are those who want to help up and those who want to hand out. And we have to, I think, to try to distinguish who those people are when we're making these decisions. And lastly, I want to say that it is our community's responsibility to deal with homelessness and to make wise decisions about that. I don't think it is the city council's responsibility to end homelessness. And Madam Mayor, I think that you have expressed yourself in such a way where you have tried to encourage that ending homelessness be part of the decision process that the city council makes. If anything, I think your job is to protect the general public from those who are violating. And when my own children do things that are wrong, I don't enable them to continue to do something that's wrong. And I love them. I do things to prevent them from continuing to go down that path. I think that's part of what needs to be considered here.
I do maybe just want to pause really quick because there's been kind of some discussion about helping those who need a hand up, and then Lisa, you mentioned the bad actors, those who are disobeying and again a repetition of those who are disobeying the law. I just want to list a couple of things that the city has also done in the past just couple of years to address some of those things as well. The City Council has hired a park ranger to monitor the city's jurisdiction on the Riverwalk, Tunnel Drive to Sells Avenue and Parks. We have now expanded that to the entire Riverwalk. We started a co-responder program to pair a Sylvista mental health clinician with a patrol officer to better wrap around mental health calls and needs. We've made it a civil offense to block public rights-of-way, such as sidewalks or medians, by panhandlers. Prohibited camping on city-owned property. Code enforcement has been moved from the engineering department to the Canyon City Police Department. Code enforcement regulations have been strengthened. We've engaged in civil action, so abandoned houses, often used for illicit squatting and activities, can be acquired for remedial purposes. We've placed a campground host at the new Royal Gorge Campground and required a small camping fee to discourage encampments. And we've started locking the public restrooms overnight to discourage unwanted overnight guests. So we're definitely trying to look at holistically the entire picture between enforcement and making this not a comfortable place to be if you just want to be one of those bad actors, but also make it a place if you want and need a hand up and are seeking that's available. Kathy Finney, you are next.
Good evening. I'm a Canyon City resident for the last 56 years. This was a place where I could play outside on the corner of 15th and Harrison until way past dark, and I was safe. Now, that's not an option. We have, around my dad's house, probably 3 vacant homes that homeless people are living in. He has had issues. We've had the police to his house. Safety is not a priority for him. My complaint and my concern is the fear that is being invoked on, are we going to be sued? Are we going to be another Boulder County? Fear to make us act on that is the wrong avenue to take us down. Who's going to give any of these organizations the permit to open up? Who's going to go in and make sure that they have clean bedding, washers, showers, staff? Do they have to approach this council, and are you signing off saying that you visited this building and verified that they have met all the criteria? And if not, who does? Then, if something happens in those facilities and they decide to sue said facility, does that come back on the city? No, it stays in the hands of that facility. Is that facility aware of that? Is that facility going to take on that responsibility? I support Loaves and Fishes. I have supported Loaves and Fishes for years and years and years. I'm not against helping somebody. I am against the situation of endangering our families, our open spaces, our kids, our schools. Our own homes are being violated by people who do not respect the word no trespassing, whether it's in city limits or in county limits. I am asking you to do the right thing, and that does not mean we have to be codependent and feel guilty if we're not having a soup kitchen 7 days a week. It means we do something that's proactive, but we do it for all involved. Thank you.
William Simpson.
I actually didn't intend to attend this meeting tonight, but I was watching it on television and I just could not resist. My name is Bill Simpson. I've been in the affordable housing industry since 1977. I was executive director of the Upper Arkansas Council of Governments. I was the community development director for the city of Canyon City. And in fact, I implemented most of the affordable housing programs that exist in this community today. I was also the development officer for the Colorado Division of Housing for this region for 7 years and was very involved with the homeless initiatives of the state. And actually left because, quite honestly, I didn't agree with some of the policies that they were implementing. And I've been listening to the jargon that you all have been using in this process that very much come from the homeless industrial complex. Things like our most vulnerable, housing first, and those sorts of things. Those are very expensive programs. And in fact, they steal from the affordable housing community that traditionally serves our senior population, our working low-income families. And it basically builds housing at a very high cost, like Journey Home. It provides Section 8 rental assistance for those families as long as they wish to live there, which I don't have an objection to the folks that actually come off the street, do something with their lives, and try to make themselves better and make the community better. But I think you're addressing, what you're trying to address today are the chronically homeless that really aren't just homeless. What this crowd has been trying to tell you for some time, these people have drug addictions. And all the homeless initiative programs don't require services. They offer services, but they don't require them. So you're basically talking about taking people off the street that are still going to be roaming the neighborhoods and doing the things they do. I read a statistic from the city of Los Angeles where the homeless population makes up 1% of the population, but they commit 20% of all the crime. And that's because they're desperate. They're drug addicts. And unless you have a program that deals with that, you're not going to be successful. And I came to the what you call the work session last week, which really was something to try to push your ideas down our throats. We came to that meeting so you could listen to us. I heard somebody suggest we could break into small groups. We could give you inputs. One of you said in the meeting, and that's why I came down here, they said, well, if you have ideas, come and share them with us. We tried to do that, and you didn't listen. Go back to your constituents. Let us come. We're stakeholders too. Actually, we're the stakeholders that have the most to lose. We're homeowners, we're business owners, we have families, we have children. I live on the Riverwalk. I have the camps right across the street from me. My wife and kids can't play outside. I have people come into my property, sleep in my beds, use my toilets, don't even have the courtesy to flush them. I have to call for police backup to have them removed from the property on a regular basis. That's what I want dealt with. I have compassion for the homeless, but I ask that you have some compassion for your most vulnerable residents, which are the people sitting in this room. That's what I ask you to do. And I'm happy to come in and sit on a committee to try to help you come up with a plan that so far you've ignored us. Thank you.
Excuse me. It's Ashley Shepperly's turn to talk. Ashley Shepperly.
Hi guys, we're back. All right, so mine is actually quick. I don't know if anybody read the Daily Record article. So I just have a question on one of the paragraphs that was written in it. I just need clarification on it. Pretty much what it talks about is having these churches or inside buildings. It said this is sort of a way to address it by delegating it to the experts to the extent that they take advantage of the opportunity. If they don't, we still have the opportunity in our land use code. So I was just wondering if you can clarify that. So if the
Ryan or Corey?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. So there was a small snippet in the newspaper, and it's talking about delegating everything to the churches and all that. And it says if they don't, so I'm assuming it's saying if the churches don't or we don't have someone step up, that we still have the opportunity in our land use code. And I just don't know what that means.
So what it's saying is that this ordinance enacts the land use code. If nobody uses it, it just sits there. Nothing happens with it.
In other words, this gives the authority for someone to apply for a temporary use, but if no one uses it, then it's never going to come before, there's never going to be an
So that's what
application.
land use code is? I just don't know what that is.
Yeah, the land use code is what what's allowed. What are the citizens allowed to use the land for? And it's.
So is that saying like at that point we would allow outside?
No.
Or no?
It,
Okay.
It would be available for use to the extent that somebody actually applies to use it.
Okay. I just
So-
needed clarification. Thank you.
Yep.
Fred.
Thanks for letting me double time up here. You mentioned that the city hadn't spent any money. And then you just mentioned we hired a park ranger. Are those volunteers?
No, I said we, except for. And so that's like enhanced CCPD and for the park
Okay.
rangers, for the bike patrols, for
Right.
cleaning up the encampments. That's
Right.
what we spend money on.
Exactly. So as you've seen in some of the cities, it's been in the news, Austin, San Francisco, some of the smaller cities that made the mistake of going down this road and it getting out of control. And the cities spend huge amount of money, not only the sanitation, the water, the police force. It puts strains on the entire citizenship of the towns. So it's not like we're not going to spend any money to support this. We will.
So that is all the citizens' requests that we've had. And the- After we have our final citizens' request to speak to council.
You can fill it out afterwards if you'd like to.
Councilmember Smisher.
Sorry, I'm still trying to unpack Ms. Shepperly's question, and it was a quote actually from our city attorney Hoffman, and I just want to make sure that I understand it as well. So if you don't mind, I would just like to read the full quote from the Daily Record because I'm still not sure that I quite understand. So it says, I am a strong believer that under our form of government in Colorado, the social services is not a municipal function, but but Canyon City is forced to address it because there is a vacuum and it's not being addressed, Hoffman said. This is a sort of a way to address it by delegating it to the experts to the extent that they take advantage of the opportunity. If they don't, we still have that opportunity in our land use code. So I guess what my question is what is the opportunity that we're talking about?
The opportunity for them to apply for an overnight shelter.
So even if we don't have this ordinance, okay.
No.
What's the existing land use code?
No authorization for a temporary use as an overnight shelter.
Then how do they have that opportunity in our land use code?
Under the land use code, if it were amended.
It's a trigger.
Right.
So what you're saying is that even if no one chooses to put in an application, the opportunity to do so in the future is still there in the land use code if this ordinance passes?
Yeah, if it passes. All right.
You said solve homelessness and temporary shelter in the same sentence, and that's a contradiction. You can say that it starts there, and on some level, yes. Sleeping off the street the first night is step one, right? But without extensive programs in place, that is no solution. So we're talking about two different things as if they were the same. So I don't know how we can possibly move forward from this idea that is living in confusion. You said you wanted a solution to the damage and the needles and the dangers. Those are the exact individuals that don't have to and won't stop living that life. The solution to criminal activity is not a sanctuary for the criminals in their downtime when they're not wreaking havoc on the residents and the businesses. The solution to criminal activity is legal consequences. To address, because we have different groups of homeless, right? We have the people that need help, the people that are on hard times, everybody needs help. The people that want the help, that will accept the help, that are on hard times, and then we do have criminals, and then we have drug addicts. And, addiction has to be fixed before someone even wants to reenter society, if we're talking about the part of the subject of this that is solving homelessness. So I believe that an addict or a criminal needs a place to go when there's nowhere to go, but I wouldn't call a plumber to roof my house and then tell him that all he has to do is give me a description of his personal opinion on how he's going to keep it from raining in my living room. If you really cared about helping the homeless, you would be concerned with what it truly entails to help someone get off the streets, which we can't make. The people that are leaving those needles in the park, they're not going to accept that help because they want to do their drugs. They don't want to do anything else because that's how addiction works. I don't know if any of you know someone that's been in addiction personally, but if you do, you know exactly what I'm talking about. To follow up on what the gentleman in the white shirt said, I previously stated that we certainly need to fix any and all flaws within our system already set in place to help those that do want and will accept help. But no citizen in this room or in this community is threatened by a good man or woman that's fallen on hard times and needs a hand up. We're concerned about the dangerous behaviors that you recognized earlier in your statements. And they already don't utilize what's available because that's not on their list of priorities. If these members of the community were offended by good people on hard times, they would say that. That's not the issue here. So again, in the same ordinance, we're talking about two different problems. To solve homelessness, as you said, was the point of this ordinance, your words. That starts with a homeless individual that chooses to go through the lengthy process and steps to achieve getting off the street and becoming a functioning, contributing member of society. Now we have to create these extensive programs. Can I sign another paper and get back in line?
Thank you. We appreciate your time. Thank you. I do want to share maybe some enlightenment. When we first hired the park ranger and the co-responders and patrols on the Riverwalk, it was, we have these dangers, we need to enforce, we need to, take criminals in, and it was really surprising that when we asked for reports from the park ranger and the co-responders and to the police officers that were doing these enforcements for safety, and we said, you know, come back in 6 months, we want to report what's happening. Is this working? What are you doing? And we also had people from the Parks Department come. And I was actually surprised. They said that actually the most powerful thing that had happened by having that was their face-to-face conversations, by the thousands of face-to-face conversations, and building trust. So those who do have addictions, those who do have mental illness, they were able to build a relationship, a trusting relationship. So those who were normally having those bad behaviors were beginning to have the ability to choose to make changes in their life. And that surprised me. And so the shelter, if a church was to choose to have a temporary shelter, if we choose to make it for inclement weather only, that's another opportunity to start building those face-to-face conversations and to be able to have those opportunities to sit down and hear those conversations and help people to begin to choose to make changes in their lives.
They're not experts on anything on that list, especially not psychological counseling. You know, and those are real problems that they do need help with. But like I said, you can't, you know, send somebody into a field that's not their expertise. And I don't see how that's going to solve anything.
So our co-responders have that expertise. They do.
So any private organization can come up with their own description of
it
how
comes
they
in-
can offer services and aid in that, what it says here, in psychological counseling.
It's a description of provided. So they don't, the church doesn't have to provide it. They can invite Rocky Mountain Behavioral Health or Savista Health to become partners in it. So those professionals are there as part of that. They don't have to be experts. They just have to provide opportunities for those experts.
So those services are already in place for the people that need them from those businesses or those organizations that already exist?
Right here, to be able to get a permit, they would need to have a description of providing services to
That
help
didn't
those
answer my
people.
question.
I'm sorry, but I don't think I fully understood your question.
So the services in which the private organization that wanted to be a shelter would call, those services, those organizations, that psychological counseling, that help already exists and is already accessible.
They exist, but they could invite them to come to the people themselves because it breaks.
So
that
the
barrier.
services are currently accessible? That is my question.
That's questionable.
So that's what I'm saying. So if that's questionable, then we need to fix that first before, how can a church pull in somebody that, if that service isn't already accessible? You know what I mean?
They have those services and they can choose to invite them in to come on that level of those people
So the
at the time while they're
services
there.
are accessible currently?
It depends on the situation, and it just depends on, there's many variables to that, so I can't just say yes or no. There's so many different variables of answers to that. You want to,
Medical services, laundry services, restroom facilities, shower facilities. These are all things on site.
that's on site for item 3. I'm referring to item 5 to contain. And that's on item 5K. So now we're on time for City Council to be able to choose to have some things to say or discuss about these ordinances and the comments that were received. That we've had extensive comments on multiple occasions. Councilmember Smith.
I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I personally think we're still too far away to vote on this tonight, so that's my opinion. That's where I stand.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to have a couple of things to say. The one thing we know for sure is homelessness, the people experiencing homelessness, are not a homogeneous group. They're not a unitary group. There are different subsets to that group. We've talked about this a little bit before. There are people that are down on their luck. There are drug addicts. There are people with mental illnesses. And so it's really a mistake to use homelessness as a description of the group that we're trying to deal with. Because I do believe that we do have services in this county that homeless people, there I go saying myself, the people that are down on the luck, that are temporarily unhoused, can seek to get out of their condition. But a lot of the problems that we have heard in this meeting and in previous meetings are caused by people who have no intent to seek services or make changes in their lives. It is important, I believe, as the mayor said, to have that helping hand outstretched and to hopefully build trust with some people so that they can make use of those services. But there are definitely people out there that will not do that. One of the things that we've heard as council here is the description of conditions where we have, and I want to call them the bad actors, where we have bad actors that are engage in a pretty antisocial behavior, trespassing, camping in areas they should not be camping in. We are a home rule city. We do have the ability to sharpen ordinances beyond what the state has done. And I think it's important that as we go forward, whatever the decision here is tonight, that we look at what can be done there. Because there are possibly things we can do that's not without risk. The risk is that you get sued and you get to pay everybody's attorneys if you lose the suit. So there is substantial financial risk for the city to take action, and especially unilateral action. But just assume for a minute, perform a thought experiment here with me. Let's say that the city could pass an ordinance that was the perfect ordinance that punished those that had bad behavior, and that as a result of this ordinance, those bad actors said, boy, no way do I want to go to Canyon City. What will happen to those people? What will happen is they'll move outside the city. That's the problem. Okay, and what I'm suggesting is that the city, there are things that we can do, but to address some of the severe behavioral issues we're seeing, I think that we need a much larger group than just city council to look at this. And that would include our police department, the sheriff's office, perhaps even Florence, but certainly the county commissioners. This is something that we have to look at together to say, are there things that we can do that will address some of the behavioral issues? Because I have heard you and have heard of the severe issues, I would say, that conditions that we have right now. And I think that something needs to be done about that. Just remember, one of the things about the indoor ordinance, and I myself am not in favor of that ordinance. I believe there's a lot of flaws in it. I think that that what needs to happen with the ordinance is that we need to go back to the drawing board on that one. But I think that we need to look at not ways to restrict the organizations that may be willing to shelter people overnight in a structure, but make it easier and make it a definite short-term thing, with perhaps a 2-week period, with maybe a renewal or two in there to be able to deal with severe climate events. But the point is about the indoor ordinance is that if you are an organization that own a structure or lease a structure, you have a property interest in that structure, and you will be taking the steps to ensure that structure is protected. Because if we see the behaviors that we see along our creeks and on some of the properties here in this area, inside that building, the people that allow that will not be in charge of that building very long. The property interests provide a continuity or a communal impulse to govern behavior indoors. And thank you for that, Madam Mayor.
The only thing I would add, though, is if we even had the perfect law to arrest people and deal with it that way, that just based on the current laws and the way they are today, they would go to jail one night, get out without bail or fine, and be right back at it the next day again.
I believe, Madam Mayor, I believe that there are other things beyond that we can look at. So that's a discussion that we could have. But I believe there's other things beyond that we can do.
Because, I mean, we've done that a lot, arresting people, and they just come right back the next day. Councilmember Schmischer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I also have a few comments that I'd like to make. I think that we've heard throughout the discussions over the past several weeks that homelessness is a significant problem in our community. We've heard from individuals who have experienced homelessness and persevered through it, utilizing tools and services provided by our community. We have also heard from individuals whose quality of life and private property have been negatively impacted by the actions of some individuals. And I would say that homelessness is an extremely complicated issue with many underlying causes. We have children and veterans and those with addiction and mental health challenges who are homeless in our community. We also have residents and business owners who work hard and take pride in our community and are angry and sometimes frightened when they have to pick up needles or human waste off of their private property. So from my perspective, I think that we need to tackle this complicated issue through all angles. We, as a community, need to identify and implement a wide range of tools across the spectrum, from law enforcement to public services, to continue to counteract the underlying causes of homelessness and the effects it has on so many people in our community. Being homeless is not a crime. That being said, all individuals, regardless of housing status, who commit criminal acts should be held accountable by our criminal justice system. There is a dedicated group of organizations and individuals, the Homelessness Coalition, the Built for Zero Coalition, and they are working tirelessly on this issue, and I applaud them. They have made significant strides. However, I think we all agree that the work is far from done, and it will continue to take a concerted effort by everybody in the community to make true progress on this particular issue. As some of those who have been working on this or dealing with this, depending on your perspective, most closely, I think that we need every possible tool across that spectrum, from law enforcement to public services, if we're going to continue to help the range of individuals who are currently experiencing homelessness. I understand and respect the expertise of our law enforcement, of those in our social services, of those in those coalitions that are working on these issues. From my perspective, as it's currently crafted, without application requirements, without limitations on numbers, without other safeguards in place, I think that the ordinance does a disservice to the individuals who would be occupying spaces indoor or outdoor, as well as our broader community. And I think that we can and we must do better.
Any other comments by council?
Madam Mayor, then I have...
We do have Councilman Tracy.
Excuse me.
Councilperson.
Thanks. I guess what I wanted to say is pretty similar to what Councilmember Hamrick, some of what he said and some of what Councilmember Schmischer has said. I think we have to be careful to separate out what the issues are. I think to some extent the city has felt the need in the last year or two or recent years to step in and assist with this problem perhaps because there wasn't enough assistance occurring on a larger scale at the county level, for example, or regional, or however we want to quantify that. It may not be the city's role to do that, but I think it's really commendable that the city, whether it's individuals on council, the mayor, law enforcement, whoever it is, I think it's commendable, the work that has been done, and we should never lose sight of the successes. I too agree that we have to distinguish between people who are temporarily without shelter and are looking for assistance in getting their life back in order, and those, and we know they exist, those who are just what we've been calling the bad actors, who are often not taking advantage of services and perhaps are also committing crimes and aren't perhaps being held sufficiently accountable. So I know that we all are committed to want to look at that, whether it's at the city level or maybe it's something in state law that needs to be fixed so that we can better hold bad actors accountable. But I have the sense, I could be wrong, but I have the sense from what's been said so far that council doesn't have the will perhaps to pass any version of this on second reading. That doesn't make the issue go away. It doesn't make the problems go away. We'll just have to keep working on this, and we'll have to stay closely in touch with everyone involved, whether it's Loaves and Fishes, the co-responder team, Sol Vista, other service providers, county human services, to just continue to work together on what we can do to make it better for those who can benefit from assistance, and how we can better hold accountable those who choose to not benefit from services. So I came prepared to support the ordinance as proposed tonight with leaving out the safe outdoor spaces, but I'm not sure if the rest of council is there, and that's all I have.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Madam Mayor, I have a motion. I move that a council disapprove ordinance number 9, series of 2022, both versions that we have in front of us. So a vote yes would disapprove and not pass these ordinances.
I second.
There's been a motion and a second to disapprove ordinance 9, series of 2022. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Schmischer?
I guess my only discussion would, sorry, my mic is not on. I guess my only discussion would be that I think that we have heard solutions from the audience. We heard them at the open session. We heard several more tonight. And I don't want us to disapprove this and therefore do nothing. I think that even tonight, the idea of inclement weather, more limited spaces, the idea of, a more stringent application process, a more defined and confined, people with the right expertise, meeting the right need. There are a lot of different ideas that have been brought up, and I don't want us to disapprove this ordinance and say, okay, we're no longer going to deal with this problem, because it is a problem that is having a significant impact on our community. People's lives are negatively impacted because of this problem. So I don't want us to just disapprove this and do nothing. I don't know if it's an amendment to the motion and I do not know how to craft this. I've been thinking about it for weeks, but I want the city to continue working on having these small groups and having these, I see your hand, just one second, having these small groups and having these conversations and having this dialogue, as Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick mentioned before. I don't know if that can be an amendment to the motion, and I would love to hear Ms. Himes' thoughts and comments as well, but I don't know if that's allowed at this moment in time, so I will have to defer.
So I think that we have a clear-cut choice about the amendment as it is in front of us. Council, I believe, based on what I've heard and, in discussions, has the will to do something. It is just up to us to instruct our administrator to proceed on doing something. It does not need to be a motion or a vote. but just we can express our, a thumbs up or thumbs down on that after we have our vote.
And I think as we've heard, maybe some further workshops on smaller scales where it's easier to have actual conversations would be in order. But we need a vote on the motion and that is before us. Is there any further discussion? Then I will call a vote. Remember, the motion has been to strike this ordinance, and so a yay vote would be to strike this ordinance.
Councilmember Dennehy.
Aye.
Councilmember Schmischer.
Aye.
Councilmember B. Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Stein.
Aye.
Councilmember Tracy.
No.
Councilmember Worthington.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Aye.
All right, well, the motion to strike ordinance 9 has been approved.
So can you explain how then they go forward with that?
There's nothing happening with this ordinance. It is dead.
It's dead, but for the council, will it come again? Will you continue to work?
We will have some smaller scale workshops to work on further options for solutions.
And the public can be involved in that?
Absolutely, they always are.
We wholeheartedly support that. Number one, I know for many of us, we don't live in the city, and we appreciate you listening to us because we are directly impacted by the decisions you make.
Madam Mayor, could I just say real quickly, I'm unable to hear people who are not at a microphone.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for allowing the people in the county to be heard and for allowing us to be a part of the decision-making process because we are directly impacted by the decisions you make in that unique area. I would like to say that we would like to be a part of the solution. We would like to be included in the workshops. Some of us have a lot to contribute. And I just want to thank you for this, and I encourage you to continue to work forward and to engage all of us and to put together a list of the email addresses and the numbers of the people so that we can try and work together towards solutions that work for everyone. And I thank you.
Councilmember Schmischer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If it's all right, I would like for council to provide a little bit more explicit direction as to the next steps, because I think that we've seen that there is significant interest from the audience on this, and I know that it's certainly an issue that many in our community are very passionate about. So I'm hoping that we can provide a little bit more explicit direction as to what next steps might look like, such as convening, and I'm not to be too prescriptive, but perhaps we could ask the city administrator to come up with a plan for what the next steps would look like, including focus groups that are open to the public, including reaching out to people who have given up so much of their time already to participate, and ask him to provide that to us by like our next city council meeting in July or something like that. I don't know if that would be an amenable way forward, or the second city council meeting in July. Just the plan, not the, so that we have something to discuss and kind of consider.
Ryan, do you feel like by this second meeting in July, we can have a little bit more of a plan about our potential workshops?
Yeah, we can put something together probably by the second meeting in July.
Okay, sounds good. All right,
Thank you so much.
I am going to give us a 5-minute recess for a little bit of a break. Time to reconvene. We are now on item 10C, and this is concerning the for the council to decline coverage in the Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program effective January 1st, 2023. I believe we'll turn the time over to our HR director, or Ryan Stevens.
I will introduce it and hand it over to Ivan Morris, our HR director. The family legislation was something that was voted on by the citizens, was it last election cycle? 2020, two election cycles ago. And, we've done a lot of work looking at this. We've attended meetings by the states. This was something that looked good on paper, but ultimately it's still very much half-baked. And I'll turn it over to Ivy to kind of talk about what we've done through this opt-out process and what some of those concerns are. The good thing about this provision, though, is that even if the city opts out, employees still have the opportunity to opt in. So I'll pass that over to Ivy and let you talk from there.
So as Ryan mentioned, the Family and Medical Leave Insurance, or FAMLY as it's referred to, is a social insurance program approved by the voters in November of 2020. It exists. Yep. I have one of those soft voices like Mayor. It exists so that Colorado workers have access to paid leave. As Ryan mentioned, it's not the best written legislation. There are more questions than answers. And I say that because earlier this month, I, along with about 30 other HR professionals from the surrounding area, attended a presentation given by the state's family division, which currently consists of 3 people for this whole legislation. There's 3 people in that division as of right now. So several times during the presentation, they asked us to be patient and apologized in advance because they're still trying to figure this out, even though it's supposed to be implemented in January of next year. They said the system is not even yet fully developed, and it's not expected to be complete until the 3rd quarter, and that's an if. At this point, they're not guaranteeing it's going to be ready. That's an if. So then at the end of the presentation, many of the people that were attending the meeting were asking questions, and we presented them with several different scenarios that we as HR professionals would run into. They couldn't answer a lot of the questions, and several of the scenarios, their response was, "We didn't think about that. We'll have to get back with you." So that's the part that worries me the most, is that it's kind of making it up as it goes along, so to speak, and that's the part that concerns me, is if we as a city decide to opt in and we're requiring our employees to participate in this program that not all of them are even going to have a need for, and yet we're asking them to pay for it. So if we opt out, they still have the option to individually opt in and participate and receive the benefit on their own through the state's program that they're still developing. So as part of the legislation, we were required to provide our city employees with an opportunity to provide us with comments and testimony regarding their feelings about it. So we did that. We sent out a meeting, or a notice of this meeting on May 4th, and then we sent reminders on May 24th and June 9th. We've answered a lot of questions for the employees. They asked more about what it means for them and whatnot. So a total of 36 employees provided input, with 34 indicating they would prefer council opt-out, and only 2 saying they would like us to consider participating in the program. So it was an overwhelming response that they did not want this to be pushed on them. So we basically have 3 vote options. Option 1 is to participate in family. We're automatically obligated to participate unless we opt out. So option 1 is to go ahead and participate in it. Option 2 is to decline to participate in family, but agree to withhold and remit the employee portion. And then option 3 is to decline to participate in family and decline to withhold and remit employee premiums. So staff is recommending option 3. And the reason being is that if we agree to go ahead and take those premiums out, we're responsible for doing the calculations. And when I asked at the meeting what kind of consequences there would be for us if we miscalculated, they couldn't answer that. There could be penalties. They don't know because they haven't worked it out yet. That worries me as well. Not to mention the time that it would take staff to calculate every other Friday, calculate those deductions. They have to make sure that we are auditing it correctly, and then every quarter we would have to submit those. They'd have to go through training on how to calculate those deductions. They'd have to attend training on how to use the state system to contribute those deductions. And then just the auditing to make sure that our deductions and what we're contributing are accurate. The questions that we would get every other Friday from employees, this is what you deducted for family, it doesn't look right to me, can you explain? It just seems like it's a large administrative burden and potential financial liability to the city if we agree to go with option 2. So that's why we're recommending option 3.
A couple other just points. In addition to the emails, supervisors discuss these in stand-up meetings with staff. So they were, given many different opportunities to provide feedback. And then, going back to the calculations, we still don't have clear guidance from the state on what part of the income is eligible. Is overtime eligible? Is shift differential eligible? There's still many questions on that side of it as well.
All right, Councilmember Tracy.
Thanks. I didn't follow this legislation closely when it was passed. I know that the intent is quite good. It would be, in terms of benefit to an employee in any employment situation, it would be a far greater benefit than, for example, what the federal FMLA has provided for years, which is it provides for some leave for family reason, but it's not paid leave. This program would be paid leave, so it certainly is an advantage. But it does sound as if there's a long way to go to get it ready to be fully implemented. I do have a question about something that's on, and I don't know if any of you staff or council members have looked, but the family website, which is famli.colorado.gov, has an alert on it dated June 13th, and it says, "Attention local government employers, an initial vote to opt out can be conducted at any point before January 1st, 2023. This vote does not need to take place before July 1st. So I just wanted to be sure that as a city that we're aware, at least according to an alert on the website, that we may not have to take action by June 30th as was originally thought. And other than that, I'm not trying to advocate one way or the other on this. It sounds like it really would be a decent benefit. It took a long time, I think, for the proponents of this proposal to finally decide how to fund it as a split between employees and employers. So I hope that it does work in the long run, but I just wanted to draw your attention to that alert if you had not seen it.
Thank you, Councilwoman Tracy. Yes, we were actually sent a notification last week. I think that goes back to the, as an example of the chaos that this legislation has been. We've been told previously that we had to opt out by July 1st, and just up until last week, that was the thought, and that notice just came out. Now, Corey, I don't know if you have other thoughts on that.
Yeah, and the basis for that was the regulations initially said that the determination had to be made 180 days in advance of when premiums were going to be collected, which is January 1st, 2022, not 2023. So that is the reason that most communities across the state have either already opted out or are considering opting out, is because that came out June 13th, but the 180 days has been out for several months.
Councilmember Schmischer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First off, I'd just like to thank you so much. I know it takes a lot of time to have all of those conversations and to do all of those surveys and to really solicit the input from the individuals who would be most affected by this. So I just want to thank you for taking that time. I do have a couple of questions. Similar to Councilwoman Tracy, I think in theory and in concept, the idea behind this is certainly, an interesting one, depending on how it's funded and depending on how it's rolled out. But I think, as we've heard from you, our insurance committee and our city employees who have responded overwhelmingly do not want to have to pay into yet another mandatory program. And I certainly think that we should respect that, as it is their, they are the ones who are most significantly impacted by it. So that immediately makes me go to, okay, is option 2, where we take on the responsibility as the city for figuring out all of the calculations and doing all of the training, or is option 3 more appropriate? So my questions are in that vein. So the first one is, if we went with option 3, where the city is not responsible for doing the calculations and is not responsible for withholding the payment, would the employee then be responsible for doing all of that? And so they would just be on their own trying to figure that out and navigating that, but I guess, where would they go for resources if the city doesn't know how to do that?
The state would provide the guidance on how they calculate and remit the premiums.
Okay. And then I was also curious if the 2 people who, out of the 36 who were interested in opting in, if they had provided any more feedback other than they just wanted the city to consider it.
One of them provided feedback that the reason they were in favor of it was because they themselves had to care for elderly parents who were aging, and so when they took time off, it was without pay, and that was a burden on them. So that was the reason for the one. The second one, I'm not sure how to answer that one. They didn't really provide a solid reason for their decision.
Okay, understood. I just was curious if either one of them kind of led towards option 2 or option 3 in terms of if they were concerned about the burden that would be placed on them individually by trying to figure it out or not. But it doesn't sound like that's the case. So thank you again. I know that type of effort takes a lot of work, and it's on top of your day job, and it's on top of the 3 hours that you have been here tonight waiting for this agenda item. So thank you very much, Ivy.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple of questions. So if council votes for option 3, when would notification be made to the state?
As soon as the system is available. It's still being developed. They are anticipating that it will open up by 3rd quarter, and then we would register in the system, and then we would upload the resolution.
As a matter of fact, the state has asked us not to send notification until the system is ready.
So a follow-up question, if we notified the state that we were opting out and they produced a crackerjack of a family leave program and we wanted to opt back in, could we change our, that notification?
The answer is yes.
Okay. And the other question I have is just for personal interest, but who's on the city's insurance review committee?
As myself, Ivy, Tammy Nordyke, our finance director, Travis Payne from our water superintendent, Jim Johnson from facilities, Kim Swearingen, public works director, Chief Schick,
and Suzanne.
Rex Brady, and Suzanne Lasha from the museum.
And our insurance broker as well.
Yeah, no, the insurance committee meets with our insurance broker on a quarterly basis.
You didn't include the museum? Geez.
Basically all the department heads. Except for you. Any other comments or questions from council? I'd like to entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor and Council, I move to approve Resolution 8, Series of 2022. Oh, option 3.
I second.
There's been a motion and a second for option 3, and that is to opt out. Any discussion? Call vote.
Councilmember Dennehy?
Aye.
Schmisher?
Aye.
B. Smith?
Aye.
Stein?
Aye.
Tracy?
Aye.
Worthington?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick?
Aye.
Thank you, council. Thank you, Ivy.
So just for clarification, under the legislation, we now have 30 days to provide notification to employees of how they can opt in to the program if they so choose. So that will go out within the next week.
All right, thank you kindly. We'll now move on to item D, and this is introduction and adoption by title only, Resolution 9, Series of 2022, entitled Establishing the Canyon City Energy Franchise Committee. Ryan Stevens.
This resolution replaces Resolution 6, Series of 2021, which established the Energy Committee. The need for the resolution is because Kathy Worthington, who's sitting right next to me, was selected to serve on City Council. She was an Energy Committee meeting member, and rather than lose all of the institutional knowledge and expertise that we've gained by having Councilman Hamrick, and Emily Tracy, and Kathy Worthington on the Energy Committee, we are opting to make a change here to the composition of the Energy Committee in order to retain that knowledge and continue to move forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Tracy.
I just wanted to check to see if this new proposed resolution needs to say anything more specific about the fact that it's replacing the previous one or updating or whatever. It doesn't, I don't think, have language in it that says that.
Oh, it does it right there.
It doesn't need it, although the city council could certainly choose to add it.
I do keep it on a list with all of our resolutions and all our numbers, and it states there that it's repealed for another one if that's what we do.
So since this, correct me if I'm wrong, but since this has language, the language essentially is superseding the previous ordinance, and so this controls, even though the other ordinance was effective during its term.
Resolution, yes, sir.
Resolution. Thank you.
And I do have one other kind of unrelated question, if I can. Way back at the beginning of the meeting, I did have an announcement that would come under council member announcements, but didn't get recognized for that. So I wonder if I could do that after the vote on this resolution.
Yes, but please remind me.
Okay.
Councilmember Schmischer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had one proposed amendment to the resolution. I noticed that the change in composition was to change the number of Canyon City residents. It used to read 2 to 3. And obviously with Councilmember Worthington vacating her citizen spot and moving to a council member spot, the natural inclination would be to just change that to 1 to 2. But I did reach out to the county commissioners today to just see whether or not they actually would want to fill the Fremont County Commissioner slot or not. And they did note that, that they think it would be better for a citizen to have that spot because they don't intend to fill it. So I would suggest that we, I think we had a number of citizens who were interested in serving on the Energy Committee when you, sorry, I wasn't on council at the time, when you last considered it. So I would suggest that we change number 3 to 2 to 3 Canyon City residents to Canyon City Energy Future Committees and strike 1 Fremont County Commissioner so that we're still ending with 9 members, but ensuring that as many citizens as possible can participate. Thanks.
Would you like to make a motion in that way?
If there's no further.
I have a comment, if I may.
Well, Councilmember Worthington will be first and then back to you, Councilmember Tracy.
Thank you.
I can speak. It hasn't been much tonight, but my comment with that, Councilman Schmier, is that we have done so much research and frankly educating everybody on how utilities work and what our hopes or dreams are. It might be difficult to bring somebody else onto the committee, but I think it's not a bad idea if they're willing, and I'd be glad to try and I'm sure any one of us would be glad to try and catch them up to speed as much as we possibly could. So I'm okay with
There's been an
that.
insane amount of hours of work that has been done by these committee members, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Councilmember Tracy.
Councilmember Worthington kind of said part of what I was going to say. I would be, well, we did make one change when I came onto council at the beginning of this year, and I, at that time, suggested that it would be good to bring on another citizen member, since I was kind of moving into a council member role, while retaining a role of being one of the two Canyon City's energy future spots. So it does get complicated over time. But when we talked about it a few months ago, I know that the committee was kind of inclined to not try to bring someone else new on. I would not be opposed to that, but at the same time, I would say I'm inclined to not take out the Fremont County Commissioner wording either, because, there's a whole lot of people who live outside of the city limits for whom it's going to be important what the city ultimately does or does not do regarding electricity service. So I haven't given up hope that the commissioners might at some point plug into what we're doing here. So I'll leave it at that.
Councilmember Schmischer?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to comment. I am not on the Energy Committee, obviously, and I defer to those of you who have poured countless hours into it. My impression from the wonderful briefings and conversations that we've had is that this is a long-term marathon effort and definitely will not be over anytime in the near term. So I always like to think about the future and like to think about succession and planning and ensuring that there are plenty of backups and people who are trained up to fill all of the necessary spots. So that's, I always want to be as open and transparent as possible and to have as many people who want to participate be able to participate as possible. I certainly understand the amount of time and effort and brain power that everyone on that committee has put in thus far. But I just think if the Energy Franchise Committee has to continue on for several more years, there may be turnover in its members, and bringing somebody on board at this juncture may end up being a prudent decision. So that's just a couple of thoughts.
I would just say if it does continue for several more years, there will be turnover.
Yeah. Councilmember Tracy, your hand is still up. Did you have anything further to say?
Whoops. You're muted.
You're muted.
Oh, she took her hand down, so.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry.
I would like to entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we approve Resolution 9, Series of 2022, with the amendment of changing 1 to 2 Canyon City residents to 2 to 3 Canyon City residents and striking 1 Fremont County Commissioner.
I second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Call a vote.
Councilmember Dennehy.
Aye.
Schmischer.
Aye.
B. Smith.
Aye.
Stein.
Aye.
Tracy.
Aye.
Worthington.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Aye.
All right, the motion carries. The committee has been expanded. As far as having an extra committee member available, is that something you want to advertise?
Yes, it would be something that we would advertise again and conduct some interviews.
All right. Well, we'll
So
take
with
care
this
of that.
change, is it going to now be an open meeting?
That is correct, yes, sir.
So as a council member, I can go back to attending?
Yes, sir, you
Okay.
could.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Last meeting I did publish, and I've already published for the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Councilmember Smith. It is time to move into executive session.
I have a motion.
Let's do it.
Madam Mayor, may I make my
Oh,
announcement?
thank you for the reminder.
You might think it's just going to be stupendous because I've just been waiting and so anxiously to do this. But I did want to announce that tomorrow evening is the regular monthly meeting of the Community Advisory Group for the Cotter Uranium Mill Superfund site. It's important to note just a couple of things of the many things on the agenda. I did want to make note of a couple things. There's going to be an update on the status of the remedial investigation report, which has now been in the works for several years. There's also going to be information provided regarding an Environmental Protection Agency meeting that was held with a group called Housing O2 that is looking to develop the old Shadow Hills Golf property. But there are certain restrictions on what they can do and when they can do it because of it being within a Superfund site. So there will be an update in regard to that, and also some other things on the agenda. I want to mention too that there is a new project manager. There's not so much turnover in the community members of the community advisory group, but there's regular turnover in the regulatory personnel with the state and with the federal government. There's a new project manager with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment who's on this project now, starting within the last month. He is going to pay a visit to the community tomorrow morning, meeting with some of the community members of the CAG, going over some material at the History Center, some of the Cotter material that is kept there on file as an official repository for that material. He's also going to be taking part in a tour of, not of the site itself, but of impacted areas of the community and learning a lot from some community members. So just wanted to alert you to those things going on with the Cotter CAG. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Madam Mayor and Council, I move that the City Council enter into executive sessions for the following purposes. An executive session to consider personal matters regarding the municipal court judge contract pursuant to CRS 24-6-4024F.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second to go into executive session. Any discussion? Call vote.
Councilmember Dennehy.
Aye.
Schmisher. Aye. B. Smith.
Aye.
Stein.
Aye.
Tracy.
Aye.
Worthington.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick.
Aye.
So council will now go into executive session. I'd like to invite Judge Allen to join us, at least for the beginning of that discussion, so you can introduce yourself.
Real quick, Emily, can you tell us where that meeting is tomorrow night?
It's a Zoom meeting. Just contact me if you want information about that.
Thank you.
And are we meeting in the other chambers?